Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain began softly at first, a gentle tapping against the leaves above. But as the evening wore on, the sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't a comforting rain. This one carried with it a foreboding chill, as though the sky itself was trying to drown out something far more sinister. Deep in the heart of the forest, nestled in the hollow of a forgotten hill, stood an old lodge. Its wooden beams, weathered and scarred by years of storms, groaned beneath the weight of the tempest. The place had long since fallen into disrepair. There was no longer any joy to be found here, no laughter or warmth of a crackling hearth. Just the sharp scent of wet pine and the occasional snap of a branch being torn free by the wind. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the musty smell of dust and decay. The light of a campfire flickered weakly in the hearth, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance along the cracked walls. The flickering flame was barely enough to ward off the darkness that crept from every corner, as though the shadows themselves were eager to swallow up the room. The fire popped and crackled, but its warmth seemed distant, as if it was too tired to offer much comfort. Each gust of wind rattled the windows, and for a moment, it sounded almost as though something, or someone, was knocking. But when you dared to look, there was nothing there, just the rain, thick and steady, pounding against the glass. You sat near the fire, knees drawn to your chest, wrapped in an old, fraying blanket. The cold seeped into your bones, no matter how tightly you tried to huddle around the flames. It wasn't just the weather that made you uneasy, it was something deeper, something that had taken root in the very walls of this place. The lodge had a history, though no one was willing to speak of it openly. Whispers swirled in the nearby villages about the things that had happened here long ago. Some said the place was cursed, others spoke of people disappearing into the forest, never to be seen again. But no one ever came back to confirm or deny those stories. And then there were the eyes. Some nights, when the wind howled just right and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe, you could almost convince yourself that something was watching you. The feeling would start as a tickle at the back of your neck, then grow into a heavy pressure, as though unseen eyes were following your every movement. You'd look, of course, but all you'd ever see were the thick trees swaying in the storm, their limbs reaching out like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Suddenly, the fire gave an alarming crackle, sending a shower of sparks into the air. You jumped, heart racing. For a split second, the room seemed to hold its breath. The fire seemed to flicker, its light briefly replaced by an unsettling darkness, only to snap back to life moments later. But in that brief moment, there was something different. The shadows hadn't returned to their corners. They were stretching, growing longer, and twisting into unnatural shapes. The wind had stopped, almost as if it too had taken a breath, waiting for something. It was in that silence that you heard it, a soft rustle like footsteps moving across the floor, too light to be your own. They were slow, deliberate. Your pulse quickened as you glanced toward the entrance, expecting to see someone, or something, emerging from the dark. But the door remained closed, the shadows beyond thick and impenetrable. It was then that you noticed it, hanging just above the fireplace, a strange, weathered painting. You had never paid much attention to it before. It was easy to overlook amidst the damp, crumbling room. But now, under the flickering firelight, the painted figure seemed to be watching you, its eyes glinting with an eerie intelligence. The painting depicted a man standing in the very forest outside, his face partially obscured by shadows. But the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, as if they weren't painted at all, but alive. You shook your head, brushing off the creeping sensation crawling up your spine. "It's just the storm," you whispered to yourself, trying to steady your breathing. But the words felt hollow in the silence. Outside, the rain picked up again, its rhythmic pounding a constant reminder that the world outside was just as wild and untamable as the lodge itself. But the silence in the room, that was another matter. It was a suffocating silence, a heavy stillness that pressed against your chest and made it difficult to breathe. It was the kind of silence that you knew, deep in your gut, was unnatural. And then you heard it again. A soft, barely audible whisper, as though it were being carried by the wind. Your body froze. The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the roar of the storm, but it was there. And it was coming from the direction of the painting. You tried to convince yourself it was nothing. The storm played tricks on your mind, right? The old wood of the lodge creaked and groaned under the pressure. Surely it was just the house settling. But then the whisper came again, clearer this time and unmistakable. "Don't look." Your breath caught in your throat. You stared at the painting, the figure's shadow seeming to lengthen with each passing second, its eyes gleaming more brightly. Was it your imagination? Or had the figure in the painting moved? The fire sputtered once more, and for the briefest of moments the entire room was plunged into darkness. In that silence, a new sound emerged. Soft, barely perceptible, like someone was breathing just behind you. The darkness that enveloped the room was thick and oppressive, as if the very air itself was alive with tension. For a moment, you could hear nothing but your own heartbeat, pounding in your chest like a drum. Each breath you took felt shallow, as though the air had thickened into a heavy fog that made it difficult to fill your lungs. And then the whisper came again. This time it was much closer, so close that you could feel the breath on the back of your neck. You spun around, eyes wide, but there was nothing. The room was empty, save for the shadows and the flickering firelight. The soft crackle of the flames was the only sound now, a feeble reminder of warmth in a place that felt increasingly cold. You stood unsteadily, your feet shifting on the wooden floor. The firelight danced across the walls, casting long, stretching shadows that seemed to move with a mind of their own. The sensation of being watched grew stronger with every passing second, as if the walls themselves were closing in. You moved slowly, your body tense, the hairs on your arms standing on end. Every creak of the floorboards beneath your feet seemed to echo in the silence, too loud, too deliberate. Your eyes kept darting back to the painting, the man in the forest, his face half hidden in the shadows. The whisper had come from that direction again, and now the shadows in the painting seemed darker, more defined, more alive. You could swear that his eyes followed you, that they glinted with a sense of knowing. But how could that be? The painting had been there when you first arrived, unchanged, just another relic of the past. But now, it felt different. It felt wrong. You took a few steps forward, compelled by some unknown force, your feet dragging as if weighed down by invisible chains. The air around you felt colder, almost frigid, and the temperature dropped with every step you took toward the painting. It was as if the lodge itself were trying to push you away, warning you to turn back. But you couldn't. Some force, pulled you closer, urging you forward, urging you to see. Your hand trembled as you reached for the frame, brushing your fingers against the cold, damp surface of the wood. The moment your touch made contact, you froze. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards, the walls, the very ground beneath your feet. It was a sound that didn't belong, a sound that seemed to come from the deepest corners of the earth, from the very bowels of the forest itself. It was the kind of sound that made your skin crawl, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in your chest and rattled your bones. Then a snap. The painting jerked slightly, as though it had been disturbed by some invisible force. You stumbled back, heart hammering in your chest. Your breath came in shallow gasps, and for the briefest of moments, you wondered if you should run, if you should leave the lodge and never look back. But you couldn't. You couldn't turn away. The whisper came again, this time clearer than before, and you could feel it in your very soul, deep within the marrow of your bones. Help me. The voice was soft, pleading, desperate. It was coming from the painting. You turned back to the wall, eyes wide with fear and confusion. The shadows within the painting were no longer still. They were shifting, moving, swirling as if they had a life of their own. And the figure, the man, his face was now visible. His features were twisted in a grotesque expression of agony, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth frozen in a scream that could never escape. The shadows seemed to pulse around him, dark tendrils creeping along the edges of the frame, like fingers reaching out from the painting, desperate to grasp anything they could find. Your heart skipped a beat as the man's eyes locked onto yours, and for the briefest of moments, it felt as though he was trying to communicate, trying to warn you. But you couldn't understand. His eyes were wide, full of something ancient, something dark. Suddenly, the wind howled outside, louder than before, and the rain picked up, drumming against the windows with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the lodge. The fire sputtered and crackled, sending a flurry of sparks into the air, but still the shadows in the room grew darker. The hum grew louder, a low, guttural sound that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. And then, as if the very room had been holding its breath, it happened. A single sharp crack. The firelight dimmed for a moment, and when it returned, the painting was different. The figure in the painting had moved. Its arm was outstretched, reaching for you. Your breath caught in your throat as you stumbled backward, eyes locked onto the movement in the painting. The shadows around the figure seemed to writhe, twisting and coiling like living things. The firelight flickered again, and for a moment the entire room was plunged into darkness. In that instant you heard it. A faint scraping noise, soft but unmistakable. Someone was moving in the darkness just beyond the edge of the firelight. Your pulse quickened, and you spun around, eyes searching the room for any sign of what was there. The lodge felt alive with presence now, as though it had awakened from some long slumber. The walls seemed to groan under an unseen weight, and the floor creaked as though someone, or something, was walking through it. Every nerve in your body screamed for you to run, to escape, but you couldn't move. The fear had rooted you to the spot, leaving you frozen, your mind scrambling to make sense of the madness unfolding before you. And then the whisper came again, louder than ever before. "Help me, get out, don't stay." Your heart was in your throat as you looked around the room, desperately searching for the source of the voice. It seemed to come from all around you, as if the lodge itself were speaking to you, warning you of something far worse than you could imagine. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the firelight was no longer enough to keep the shadows at bay. They swirled and twisted in the corners of the room, growing larger, darker, and more oppressive. And that was when you saw it. A figure standing in the doorway. It was tall, its form barely visible in the low light, but its presence was undeniable. Its face was obscured by shadows, but you could feel its eyes on you, watching, waiting. And in that moment you knew it was the same figure from the painting. The same man, the same tortured expression. It stepped forward, and the temperature in the room dropped even further, a cold so deep it felt as if your very soul had been chilled. You wanted to scream, to run, but your legs wouldn't move. You were rooted to the spot, caught in the grip of something ancient, something far more powerful than anything you had ever known. The figure took another step forward, and the darkness seemed to part before it as if it were a living thing. And then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, it spoke. "Come with me." The words hung in the air, thick with an otherworldly weight, as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched. "Come with me," the figure whispered again, its voice cold and hollow, reverberating deep within you like a distant echo. Your heart hammered in your chest, each beat louder than the last, but you couldn't look away. You couldn't tear your eyes from the shadowy figure standing just inside the doorframe, its face still hidden in darkness. The air felt as if it were thickening, pressing in around you, making it hard to breathe. For a long moment, nothing moved. The figure remained still, its shape barely discernible in the dim glow of the firelight. But it was there, its presence was undeniable, suffocating, like a suffocating weight pressing down on your chest. The shadows seemed to grow darker, longer, more alive with each passing second. They slithered across the walls, pooling in the corners of the room, creeping towards you, like hungry creatures that hadn't eaten in years. It was as though the entire lodge had become a prison, and the shadows were its chains. You wanted to speak, to call out, but the words died in your throat. You couldn't make a sound. It was as if your very voice had been stolen from you, your breath caught somewhere deep inside your lungs. Then a sudden, sharp sound broke the silence. The crackling of the fire, the rustling of the wind outside, it all seemed to fade into nothingness, and in that eerie quiet, you heard it, a faint scraping noise like nails against the floor. It was coming from the shadows, from the corners of the room where the darkness seemed to writhe and coil. And then the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped into the room, its form still obscured by the shadows, but now, its presence was more tangible, more immediate. It was tall, taller than any person you'd ever seen, and its movements were unnaturally smooth, gliding across the floor as if it were weightless. You backed up a step, your body shaking uncontrollably. Your mind screamed at you to run, to escape, but your legs refused to move, as though they were frozen in place by some unseen force. The figure took another step forward, and this time, its face was visible just for a moment. It was empty. There were no eyes. No features, no mouth, no expression. Just a hollow black void where a face should have been, an endless, sucking darkness that seemed to draw you in with an unbearable force. You could feel it in your chest, in your bones, the pull of that emptiness, the pull of the void. And yet, despite the horror, there was a strange, unexplainable compulsion to move toward it, to reach out, to walk into the darkness. "Come with me," the figure whispered once more, but this time the words weren't spoken. They were felt deep within you as if they had been etched into your very soul. You could hear the coldness in the voice, the finality of it. There was no choice here, no decision to be made. You were already being pulled, being beckoned by something far greater than yourself. Your body moved of its own accord, your feet dragging across the floor as you took a step toward the figure. Each step felt like it took all the strength you had left, but you couldn't stop. The pull was too strong. It was as though an invisible hand had latched onto your soul, tugging you forward with irresistible force. The room seemed to close in around you as you moved closer, the shadows pressing in, the air growing colder with each passing second. The fire sputtered and crackled in the hearth, its warmth no longer enough to fight back the chill that had settled deep in your bones. You reached the doorway, standing just inches away from the figure. Your breath came in shallow gasps, your chest tight with fear, but still you couldn't turn back. The figure loomed above you, and though you could no longer see its face, you could feel its presence pressing down on you, suffocating you. Without a word, it extended a hand toward you, a long, slender arm reaching from the shadows. Its fingers were impossibly long, like branches twisted by time, the skin pale and translucent. It reached for you, and as it did, the temperature in the room plummeted even further. You felt the cold seep into your skin, your muscles, your very soul. It was a cold that went beyond physical sensation, a cold that numbed you from the inside out. And yet you couldn't resist. The hand was mere inches from yours now, its fingers trembling with anticipation. And then, just as your fingers were about to brush against the cold, clammy skin, the figure spoke again. This time the words weren't a command. They were a plea. "Help me." The whisper was barely audible, but it was clear enough. There was something desperate in the voice, something so ancient and full of pain that it made your heart ache. The figure, this shadowy thing that had once seemed so powerful, now sounded fragile, broken. For a moment, you stood there, caught between the pull of the void and the pleading cry for help. The shadows around you seemed to pause, holding their breath, waiting. The wind outside howled louder, a banshee wail that seemed to tear through the walls of the lodge. But something in the figure's voice, something in the way it trembled, made you hesitate. For just a brief moment, you found your strength. The voice was wrong, it didn't belong. You could feel it now, deep in your gut. The presence in the room wasn't alive. It was something else. Something that had never been human, and perhaps never had been anything at all. Your legs shook as you stepped back, your heart racing, the fear now almost suffocating. The hand wavered, just inches from you, and the figure didn't move to follow. It remained rooted in place, its head tilting slightly as if confused by your rejection. You didn't know how long you stood there, frozen in place, battling with the urge to flee, to escape the terrible pressure that seemed to build with every second. The shadows in the room began to shift again, and the figure's form seemed to waver, flickering like a broken image. And then the figure moved, but not toward you. It stepped back, its dark silhouette retreating into the shadows, and as it did, the shadows followed it, shrinking back into the corners of the room. The air in the lodge seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, a shift in the atmosphere that made your skin crawl. But you couldn't relax. You couldn't let your guard down. Because in that moment of retreat, the figure had left something behind. A presence, a coldness, a whisper. You shouldn't have stayed. The words were barely a whisper, but they cut through the silence like a blade. They lingered in the air long after the figure had vanished, leaving a trail of unease that settled deep in your soul. The fire flickered once more, but the warmth it provided was no comfort. The room seemed darker now, the shadows deeper, and outside, the storm raged on as if nature itself were closing in. You stood alone, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Something had changed. Something had woken in the lodge. And you weren't sure you were alone anymore. The room felt colder still, the air thick and heavy, as if the very walls had absorbed the figure's presence. And now the shadows clung to you, reaching, wrapping around you. The fire sputtered weakly as if it too were growing tired. Each crackle felt like a warning. The wind outside had not subsided. It howled against the lodge like a distant cry, but now it sounded more insistent, more familiar. You felt something within the room shift again. The walls seemed to groan beneath the weight of an unseen burden. The shadows, once creeping along the edges of the room, now seemed to crawl, move in unnatural directions, as if they too were waiting, anticipating something. You tried to shake the feeling. You had to leave. You had to get out of here, away from this cursed lodge, away from whatever had just happened. But your feet felt heavy, as though the floor had somehow become part of the shadows themselves, pulling you into its depths. There was a sound, a low hum, distant yet unmistakable, that reverberated through the lodge, vibrating in the very bones of the building. It started off faint, like the buzz of an insect caught in a web, but it grew steadily louder, filling the room with a pressure that squeezed at your chest, made it harder to breathe. You staggered toward the door, hoping the sound was nothing more than the wind, the storm, but it wasn't. The door was no longer in front of you. It had been there just moments ago, but now, it had disappeared. The realization hit you in an instant like a slap to the face. You turned around, desperately searching for any way out, but the room was different. The walls were closer. The shadows seemed thicker, more oppressive. The space had shrunk. The air was heavier now, so thick that it seemed to have mass. Your lungs burned as you tried to inhale, but all you could taste was the dank, earthy scent of decay. Something was wrong with the air itself. Something poisoned, something dead. Then you heard the footsteps. At first, they were faint, just the sound of something dragging along the wooden floor. It was slow, deliberate, the echoing rhythm growing closer with each step. The sound was unnervingly close now, impossibly close, and you spun around, panic surging through you. But there was no one there. You weren't sure whether it was the flickering firelight playing tricks on your eyes, but for a moment, the shadows in the room seemed to move on their own, shifting in a way that was entirely unnatural. It was as though the room itself was alive, its walls breathing, pulsing with an unseen force. The shadows that had been creeping toward you earlier now seemed to coalesce, gathering in the center of the room like a dark mass, an ominous cloud that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. You backed away, but the walls were closing in around you. The pressure, the heavy, suffocating feeling that had once been only an uncomfortable presence, now felt like it was pressing on your skin, your chest, your very soul. And then, in the center of the room, something began to take shape. At first, it was just a blur, a shadow within the shadows. But gradually, it became more defined, more solid. It was a figure, a silhouette, tall and indistinct, but the very air around it seemed to warp and twist, as if reality itself was bending under its weight. Your breath caught in your throat as you watched the figure shift, its form becoming clearer, more detailed. It was the same figure you had seen earlier, the one from the painting, the one with the hollow face. But this time it was different. It was no longer just a figure trapped in a frame. It was here in the room with you, and it was moving toward you. You stumbled backward, your legs trembling, your heart pounding in your chest. But no matter how much you moved, the figure was always just a step behind. It was like a shadow that followed your every motion, a reflection that you couldn't escape. The air around it seemed to ripple, distorting your surroundings, making it feel like the room was warping, bending into something other. And the footsteps, they were closer now. You could hear them so clearly now, sharp, echoing in the silence like a death knell. Step, step, step. Each footfall seemed to reverberate in the very core of your being. It was no longer a sound in the distance. It was here with you. Help me. The voice came again, but this time, it was not the soft, pleading whisper it had been earlier. It was louder, more desperate, filled with a sense of finality, as if it was reaching out for something far beyond your comprehension. The figure's hand, long and thin like a twig, reached out toward you, its fingers curling in a slow, deliberate motion. You could feel the coldness in the room grow deeper, and a chill ran down your spine. The shadows seemed to swallow up the light, leaving you in a cold, suffocating darkness that closed in tighter and tighter. Without thinking, you spun around, searching desperately for an escape, but there was no way out. The door you had once seen was gone, and the walls had closed in on you. The figure was almost upon you now, its presence a crushing weight that bore down on you, forcing the air from your lungs. You gasped for breath, but your chest refused to rise. The shadows pressed in, thick and impenetrable. You couldn't see the figure clearly anymore, but you could feel it. Its presence, its cold, hollow gaze that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The figure's hand reached for you, its fingers almost grazing your skin. You could hear its breath now, slow and ragged, but it wasn't coming from its mouth. No, the sound was coming from all around you, as though the very walls of the lodge were exhaling a long, deathly sigh. And then, in a voice that seemed to be coming from the very heart of the darkness, you heard it. You shouldn't have stayed. The words wrapped themselves around your mind, squeezing, tightening like a vice. The shadow seemed to surge toward you, its presence growing ever more oppressive, and just as its fingers brushed against your arm, you heard the sound of something breaking. The walls, the floor. The very foundations of the lodge seemed to groan under an immense weight, and with a sickening crack, the ground beneath your feet splintered. For a split second, everything was silent. The air was still, and then, the room fell away. The ground buckled beneath your feet with a terrifying groan, and you felt yourself being pulled down, dragged into a yawning abyss. The once familiar walls of the lodge seemed to break apart like brittle wood, splintering under some unseen force. For a moment, everything went dark, and the air itself felt thick as though you were sinking into the very earth. You tried to scream, but the air was sucked from your lungs as the world twisted, and your feet left the floor. The shadows, no longer creeping, were now moving with violent speed, swirling around you like a whirlwind. They pulled you down further, faster, as if the very lodge had come alive to swallow you whole. The last thing you saw of the fire was its light dimming, flickering out of existence as if it were nothing more than a fleeting memory. Then all at once, the darkness consumed you. You fell deeper than you thought possible, a fall that felt endless, like the weight of the universe was pressing down on you. The air grew colder with every passing second, the temperature plummeting so rapidly it burned your skin. The sound of rushing wind filled your ears, and the pressure in your chest felt like you were being crushed under the weight of 1,000 storms. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the sensation of falling stopped. The air around you shifted, no longer pressing in with the same crushing force. You landed, softly, with no jarring impact, onto a cold, damp surface that made you instinctively recoil. It felt like stone, but it was slick with something wet, something that was slowly seeping into your skin. You forced yourself to open your eyes, heart pounding in your chest. The darkness was nearly absolute. Your breathing came in shallow, panicked gasps, but the air here felt wrong. The very atmosphere was thick with an oppressive weight, as though the very earth beneath you was holding its breath. There was no sound, no wind, no rain, not even the crackle of the fire. Only the deep, suffocating silence of an ancient place that had been forgotten by time itself. But something was there. Something you could feel rather than see. A presence, an awareness, and then, ever so faintly, you heard it. A whisper. It came from behind you, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. You shouldn't have stayed. The words, though distant, sent a chill of terror through you, crawling under your skin like an invisible hand. You wanted to turn, wanted to flee, but your body refused to obey. Your legs felt like lead, frozen in place, while your mind screamed for you to move, to escape this place that felt so wrong, so unnatural. The whisper came again, this time clearer, more insistent. We were waiting for you. The words were filled with a deep, suffocating hunger, as if they had been waiting for you for a long, long time. And you realized with a sickening clarity that this place, this lodge, wasn't just a building, it was alive. And it had been waiting for you to cross the threshold, waiting for the moment when you would be pulled into its grasp. Your heart thundered in your chest, the fear rising like a tidal wave, but still you couldn't move. You were trapped in this dark, suffocating space, unable to see, unable to breathe. The silence around you pressed in, thick and unnatural. And then you heard it, a footstep. It was so faint at first that you might have imagined it, but then it came again, closer this time. And then another, louder, more deliberate. The sound echoed around you, bouncing off the stone walls that seemed to close in on you from every direction. You weren't alone. Something was moving in the darkness. You forced your limbs to respond, your body finally shaking free from the paralysis that had kept you still. You stood, your legs trembling beneath you, and you tried to push through the suffocating darkness, feeling your way forward, one hesitant step at a time. Your fingers brushed against the slick surface of the walls, cool and smooth like stone. But it wasn't stone. It was too cold, too alive, as though the surface was breathing beneath your touch. The footsteps grew louder, closer now, unmistakable. There were more than one. Several. They were circling you, surrounding you, and with each passing moment, you felt the air grow colder, thicker, like it was pressing on you from all sides. And then, from the shadows ahead, a flicker of light, a faint, trembling glow. It was soft at first, just a glimmer, but then it grew, expanding, until it bathed the surroundings in a ghostly pale light. The shadows shrank back from the light, but they didn't disappear. No, they lingered, crawling along the edges of the glow like predatory creatures. In the light you saw them. Figures. Tall, gaunt figures, cloaked in tattered robes, their faces hidden in darkness. They moved in slow, deliberate steps, their feet not quite touching the ground. Their movements were graceful, too graceful, unnaturally so, as though they were gliding through the air. There was no sound to their steps, but their presence was undeniable. They were watching you, their hollow, unseen eyes fixed on you, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. You shouldn't have stayed. The voice came again, but this time, it was not from one of the cloaked figures. No, this voice was different. It was deeper, more resonant, like it came from the very air itself. It was the same voice you had heard before, but now it was everywhere. It seemed to reverberate in the walls, in the ground beneath your feet, in the very air around you. A figure stepped forward from the shadows. It was taller than the others, its cloak dark, almost black, and unlike the others, it did not wear a hood. Instead, its face was exposed. A face that was no longer human. It was a face that should not have been, gaunt, hollow, eyes sunken deep into its skull, skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. The features were sharp, angular, and lifeless, but its eyes were full of something. Something ancient and hollow, something that felt like it had watched the passing of centuries. And yet, there was something else in those eyes, something familiar, something that recognized you. It tilted its head, and you could hear the faintest scrape of bone against bone as its neck twisted in an unnatural angle. The figure's lips parted, revealing teeth that were jagged, broken, stained. It smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth or kindness. No, it was the smile of something that had tasted the very essence of fear. We were waiting for you. The words were spoken in perfect unison by the figures around you, their voices blending into one, as if they had practiced them, as if they had been saying these words for eons. The air grew thick with their presence, their eyes now glowing faintly in the darkness, their forms blurring, shifting in and out of focus. The light from the flickering glow grew stronger, but it did nothing to dispel the darkness. Instead, the shadows grew longer, stretching farther across the stone floor, reaching for you as if they too were hungry. You can never leave, the tall figure continued, its voice more chilling than ever. You've come too far. Your blood ran cold as the words hit you like a physical blow. You tried to turn, tried to flee, but your legs betrayed you. The stone floor beneath you was slick, and your feet slid out from under you. You fell, your body hitting the cold, wet surface with a sickening thud. You were trapped. The cloaked figures advanced, their steps in perfect harmony, the light growing brighter and brighter, yet still the shadows seemed to hold their own, pressing in from all sides. And then you felt it, the breath of something close, closer than you could imagine. A hand, cold and thin, touched your shoulder, sending a bolt of icy fear coursing through you. The figure was right behind you, but when you turned, there was nothing there. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, now filling your mind. You shouldn't have stayed. Now you belong to the forest. The words echoed in your mind, the coldness of them sinking deep into your bones. You belong to the forest. The whisper wasn't just a voice anymore, it was a presence, a suffocating weight in the air, pressing down on you from all sides. The silence that followed felt more oppressive than any sound could have been, as if the very lodge was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for you. You struggled to move, but it felt as if your body were frozen, caught in some unseen force that kept you rooted to the slick stone floor. The figures, those tall, skeletal things, circled you now, their movements slow and deliberate, like a predator playing with its prey. They didn't speak anymore. They didn't need to. Their mere presence, their eyes, those hollow, soulless eyes, spoke volumes. The air grew colder still. It wasn't just the temperature anymore, it was a presence, a weight in the atmosphere so thick that it felt like it was seeping into your very skin, into your soul. The shadows lengthened, their blackness growing darker, more consuming. You could feel them tugging at the edges of your vision, trying to pull you into their depths. And then, in the midst of the suffocating silence, there was movement. Something brushed against your leg. The touch was light, almost gentle, but it sent a shiver through you so deep that you couldn't suppress the gasp that escaped your lips. You looked down and your stomach turned over. Roots. Thick, gnarled roots, twisted and winding like the fingers of some ancient, monstrous hand, had begun to crawl from the ground. They snaked their way around your feet, up your legs, curling around your body, binding you in place. They were impossibly fast, their movement unnaturally smooth, as if they had been waiting for this moment, ready to claim you. You couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The roots pulled tighter, their rough texture scraping against your skin. You could feel them burrowing into your flesh as though they were sinking into your very being. And still, the figures circled, their hollow eyes fixed on you, watching as the forest began to claim you. It wasn't just the lodge now. No, you could feel it. The forest, the true forest, was inside. It was alive, and it was drawing you in, wrapping around you like a cage made of branches and shadows. The walls of the lodge had faded away, and now, the very ground beneath you was the earth itself, the soil of the forest. The roots, thick and powerful, grew faster, winding up your arms, your chest, until they were almost suffocating you. The very air seemed to pulse with the energy of the forest, its ancient power filling every corner of the space. You struggled against the roots, panic surging through you, but it was useless. The forest was too strong, too old. You could feel it in the way the air vibrated, in the way the trees whispered their secrets to each other. The figures were no longer circling you, they were still, watching, waiting. One of them, the tallest of the figures, stepped closer. Its face, the hollow, sunken features that had once been shrouded in shadow, were now exposed. Its skin was stretched thin, translucent, as though it had been pulled tight over a skull that had long since forgotten how to decay. The eyes, those endless, black pits, stared into yours, and you felt your body freeze, the last remnants of your willpower drained away with a single glance. It spoke, and its voice was the sound of leaves rustling in the dead of winter, a voice that had not been heard by human ears in centuries. You cannot escape the forest. You are one of us now. The words, cold and hollow, settled in your chest like a heavy weight, and you could feel them as if they were branded into your soul. The forest, the lodge, the ancient power that bound them all together, it was all a part of you now. The roots tightened again, pulling you deeper into the earth, into the soil that had been soaked with the blood and bones of those who had come before you. You could feel their presence beneath the surface, their spirits trapped in the forest, bound to the land by something older, something darker than time itself. Your mind screamed for escape, but there was nothing left to run to. The world around you was slipping away, unraveling at the seams, and the only thing that remained was the forest. The only thing that would always remain. And then, as you were consumed by the roots, as the darkness of the forest closed in, you saw something that froze your blood. Through the tangled web of branches, through the shifting shadows, you saw the eyes. Eyes that were not the hollow, empty pits of the figures, but eyes that had once been human. Eyes filled with terror, filled with desperation. They were watching you from the darkness of the trees, from behind the veil of leaves and twisted roots. The eyes blinked, pleading, and you realized with a sickening clarity that they were the eyes of the lodge's former occupants. Those who had come before, who had walked into this cursed place and had never come out. They were trapped, just as you were, bound to the forest, to the lodge, to whatever dark force had made this place its home. You were not the first. You would not be the last. The roots pulled tighter, and your body jerked as if caught in the grip of something far stronger than you could ever have imagined. The figures closed in, their cold, dead hands reaching for you, and you were pulled deeper, deeper into the heart of the forest. The roots consumed you, the darkness swallowed you, and the last thing you saw before everything went black was the forest. The real forest, stretching endlessly before you. The trees whispered their secrets, the leaves rustled with ancient knowledge. And you were one with them now. You were a part of the forest. The darkness came in waves, crashing over you with a force so powerful that it made your body feel like it was being pulled apart at the seams. The roots had fully encased you now, the earth swallowing you whole, drawing you deeper, closer to something ancient, something primal. It was as though the very ground beneath you was alive, a living thing that was both a part of the forest and the curse that had been set upon this place. You could feel it beneath your skin, crawling through your veins like it was trying to pull you into the very bones of the earth. You gasped for air, but the more you struggled, the tighter the roots became. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, wet leaves, and something else, something foul, a smell that seemed to emanate from the depths of the forest itself. It was the smell of decay, of things that had long since been forgotten, of death that had been waiting for far too long to claim what was owed to it. The shadows swirled around you like living things, their forms shifting and changing as they danced in the periphery of your vision. They seemed to pulse with a dark, rhythmic energy, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. The deeper you sank into the roots, the more you felt it, an overwhelming sense of presence, an ancient force that had been waiting, watching for someone like you to arrive. It had always been here, lurking beneath the surface, in the soil, in the air, in the very fabric of this place. And now it had you. But even in the grip of the forest's dark power, there was something else. Something flickering at the edge of your consciousness, a glimmer of light, of clarity amidst the suffocating darkness. It wasn't much, just a whisper of something that had been forgotten, a fleeting glimpse of what might have been, but it was enough to make your heart race in your chest. The whisper came again. You are not lost. It was a voice, a deep, calming voice, but it wasn't like the others. It wasn't hollow or cold, filled with hunger. It was warm, alive. A voice that you instinctively knew wasn't from the forest, but from someone else. Someone who had been there long before the curse took root. Someone who had been watching you, waiting, perhaps even for a moment like this. You must remember, the voice said again, and you felt its warmth seep into your very being, like sunlight breaking through the clouds. You are more than this. The roots suddenly loosened, as if the force binding you to the earth had momentarily faltered. You were still trapped, still bound to the darkness, but you could feel the tension in the air shift, like something ancient and powerful had momentarily turned its attention away from you. You took a deep breath, filling your lungs with the thick, humid air of the forest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, you felt a spark of hope. It was fleeting. The roots began to tighten again, but this time you were ready. You focused, your mind slipping away from the darkness and into that faint, distant voice. You didn't know where it was coming from, but it felt like a lifeline, a thread you could follow through the maze of shadows that threatened to drown you. You are not alone, the voice whispered. The forest has claimed many, but it cannot claim you. With renewed determination, you pushed back against the roots, against the shadows, against the overwhelming force of the darkness that pressed in around you. It wasn't easy. Every movement felt like you were dragging yourself through wet clay, like the very forest was trying to swallow you whole, but the voice gave you strength. A strength you didn't know you had. And then, as if to test you, the forest responded. A deep rumbling sound, like thunder, rolled through the ground beneath you, shaking the very bones of the earth. The roots pulled harder, dragging you deeper into the earth, and you felt your skin burn, your body fight against the unnatural force that sought to claim you. You were drowning in darkness, the forest closing in, but still the voice was there, still guiding you. You must remember who you are. You focused, pushing through the pain, through the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume you. You had to remember. You had to break free. And then, like a spark igniting in the darkness, it hit you. A memory, a fleeting vision, your home, a life you had long since forgotten. Faces you knew. Laughter. Light. You remembered what it was like to be alive. To walk under the sun, to breathe fresh air, to feel warmth. You had been someone before the forest had taken hold of you, before the curse had pulled you into its grasp. And that was when you realized the truth. The forest had not just trapped you, it had taken your memory, your identity. The darkness was not just physical, it was mental, emotional. The forest didn't want your body, it wanted your soul, your sense of self, to bind you to it forever. But now, as the memories rushed back into your mind, you understood. You were more than this. You were more than the forest. You were more than its curse. The voice, calm and steady, spoke again as though it had been waiting for this moment. Remember who you are. Remember the light. The roots began to loosen again. The pressure on your chest lifted. The shadows that had once seemed to devour you now receded, retreating into the darkness from which they came. For the first time since you had entered the lodge, the air felt clearer, less oppressive. You were no longer just a victim of the forest. You were no longer just a part of its curse. You were an individual, an entity with your own will, your own purpose. And you would fight. With newfound strength, you began to pull yourself free from the roots. It was slow at first, like wading through thick mud, but the more you focused on the memories of who you were, the clearer the path became. The roots that had once held you so tightly were now losing their grip, like a child's toy that had been discarded. But the forest was not going to let go so easily. A low growl rumbled from deep within the earth, and the ground beneath you trembled. The shadowy figures, the ones that had once circled you like vultures, now turned their gaze toward you, their hollow eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You cannot escape," they whispered, their voices joining together in a chorus of doom. But you were already moving. The darkness no longer controlled you. You had found your strength and you would not let it go. With a final, powerful surge, you tore yourself free from the grip of the roots. The earth itself seemed to shudder as you broke free, the oppressive weight lifting from your chest. You could feel the forest's power trying to drag you back, trying to pull you down into its depths, but you fought with everything you had left. You pushed forward, stumbling through the now fading darkness, the light from the memory still glowing in your mind like a beacon. You didn't know where you were going, but you knew you had to keep moving, keep fighting. Because the forest might have claimed others, but it would not claim you. Not today. The forest was still there, whispering at the edges of your mind. Its hunger was not something you could escape easily, nor was its curse one that could be broken with a single act of defiance. The roots were not just a physical manifestation. They were threads woven into the very fabric of the land, pulling at the very core of your being. But you had broken free, and that act of defiance, no matter how small it seemed, had made all the difference. Now, as the roots loosened their grip, you felt the earth around you tremble with an unsettling vibration. It was a warning, a threat. The forest was aware of you, and it was not pleased. The weight of its presence pressed down on you, heavier than ever before. The cold air, the damp scent of decay, and the faint rustling of unseen things moved around you like an encroaching storm. The shadows, thick as ink, shifted restlessly, their tendrils reaching for you as though they were seeking to reclaim you. The air was thick with the sense that you were not free, just a momentary reprieve, a brief flash of light in the suffocating darkness. Your heart pounded in your chest, but you didn't stop moving. Every step you took, every move you made, was a battle against the weight of the forest's oppressive power. The memory of the light, of who you were, it kept you going, but it wasn't enough to stave off the overwhelming feeling of being trapped. It wasn't enough to stop the darkness that had begun to stir again, rising like a storm that could not be contained. You stumbled forward, your feet slipping on the slick ground, your legs growing weak with exhaustion. But still, you pressed on, driven by the one thing the forest couldn't take from you, your will. The whispering grew louder, now more insistent. It was no longer a voice, but a chorus of countless voices, rising and falling like a tide. They were all speaking at once, their words tangled and incomprehensible. Some were angry, others sad, some pleading, but all of them were filled with a deep, gnawing hunger. You cannot outrun us. You cannot escape. We are the forest. You are the forest. The voices wrapped themselves around your mind like vines, suffocating, squeezing, making it harder to think, harder to breathe. Each whisper was a thread of the curse, pulling at you, weakening your resolve, tempting you to fall back into the dark embrace of the forest. But you refused. The earth seemed to move beneath you as you pressed on, the ground shifting, warping, like the very land itself was alive and aware of your every step. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the feeling of something ancient, something hungry brushing against your skin became unbearable. You could feel them, in the dark corners of the forest, watching, waiting for you to falter. You had to keep going. You had to. Through the ever-deepening gloom, you saw it. A faint light in the distance, a flicker that cut through the darkness like a beacon. It was not much, just a tiny glow, but it was enough to keep you moving. Your steps faltered, but you pushed yourself forward, toward the light, toward the hope it promised. With every step, the voices grew louder, more insistent, their cold whispers pushing at your mind, trying to drag you down. Come back. We are waiting. But still you didn't stop. The light ahead grew brighter, and with it, a sense of urgency bloomed within you. The deeper you went into the forest, the more it became apparent that the forest itself was not just alive, it was aware. Aware of your presence, aware of your struggle. It had been watching you, pulling you into its grip, and now that it had its claws in you, it wasn't going to let you go so easily. You broke through a thicket of trees, and there it was, a small clearing. The ground was uneven, twisted by the dark energy of the forest, but in the center of the clearing was something that made your blood run cold. A tree. It was unlike anything you had ever seen. Its bark was a deep black, twisted and gnarled, as if it had been shaped by centuries of suffering. Its branches stretched high into the air, reaching toward the sky like the hands of the damned, and the air around it was thick with an unnatural chill. The tree stood in the center of the clearing, alone, as though it were the heart of the forest itself. And beneath it, beneath the roots that sprawled across the earth like a vast network of veins, was a circle, a ritual circle. The light you had been following was coming from within the circle, and as you drew closer, the faint glow began to pulse. It was not a gentle light, but one that throbbed with an almost painful intensity, as if it was the last vestige of something pure that had been buried beneath centuries of darkness. You reached the edge of the circle, your body trembling with exhaustion, with fear, and with the undeniable sense that this was it. This was where the heart of the forest lay. And yet, as you looked down at the roots, at the glowing circle beneath the twisted tree, you realized that there was something else. A presence, a force within the circle, something waiting for you to approach. And then you heard it. A voice. You've come far. It was soft, almost like a sigh, but it carried with it an immense weight, as though it was speaking from beyond time, from a place where the rules of the world didn't apply. You didn't know who or what it was, but you could feel its power in your bones, in the very air around you. Do you know what you've awakened? The voice asked, its tone gentle but laced with a terrible gravity. Do you know what this forest truly is? You took a step back, your heart pounding in your chest. You were standing at the heart of the darkness, and yet a part of you felt drawn to it, felt the urge to know, to understand what lay at the core of this place. The voice continued, as though sensing your hesitation, sensing your need to know. This forest is not what you think. It was a deep, resonant whisper, like the rustle of ancient leaves. It is not just a place. It is a prison. A cage built of forgotten memories, twisted roots, and lost souls. The forest is a doorway. A doorway? To what? Before you could voice the question that burned on your tongue, the ground beneath you shook again, a deep tremor that reverberated through your very bones. The tree's branches shook violently, and for the first time you saw it. The roots were moving, creeping toward you, stretching across the clearing, eager to reclaim you, to drag you back into the darkness from which you had escaped. The voice spoke again, but this time, there was a sense of finality in it, a sorrow that resonated deep within you. You have a choice. You can turn back, return to the lodge, and become part of what you have awakened. Or you can choose to pass through the doorway, to what lies beyond the forest. But know this, once you make your choice, there is no turning back. The roots were almost upon you now, crawling toward your feet, their cold tendrils reaching for you like desperate hands. The glow from the circle pulsed in time with your racing heart, as if beckoning you. You had to choose. But what was on the other side of that doorway? And could you bear the consequences of your choice? The glow from the ritual circle pulsed like a heartbeat, its light drawing you in, compelling you to approach. But you couldn't move, not yet. The roots were reaching for you, creeping across the ground like serpents, their tendrils curling in the air as if they had a mind of their own. They were alive, and they wanted you, needed you. The forest was no longer just an environment, it was a sentient force, ancient and vast, with power that stretched beyond anything you could comprehend. The tree in the center of the clearing, twisted and gnarled, felt more like a gateway than a simple plant. It was as though it had been waiting for this moment for centuries, its roots and branches a reflection of something far older than this world. The voice, still echoing softly around you, seemed to vibrate with a terrible energy, like the very air itself was alive. It was patient, too patient, as if it were waiting for you to make the decision that it already knew you would have to face. The doorway is open, the voice continued, its tone dark yet strangely calm. But you must understand the cost of passing through. For every choice made in this forest, something is lost. You looked around desperately as if seeking an escape, but the walls of trees closed in around you. The forest had always been watching you, waiting for you to come. And now that you were here, there was no easy way out. You think you have escaped the curse, the voice whispered, but you have only uncovered the first layer. This forest, this lodge, they are all parts of the same thing. It is a memory of something long gone, a place of remembrance and decay. You felt a sharp pang of dread shoot through your chest. What did it mean by memory? The more you tried to understand, the more your mind seemed to twist under the weight of the forest's words. The roots continued to creep closer, and the light from the circle intensified, becoming blinding, like staring into the heart of the sun. It pulled at you, beckoning. The shadows that had once surrounded you now seemed to shrink back from the circle, as if the light was their natural enemy. But still you hesitated. The idea of crossing through the doorway, into whatever lay beyond the forest, terrified you. You are standing on the threshold of the unknown, the voice said, and you could hear the faintest hint of amusement in its tone, as if it found your hesitation almost amusing. The path you take is one of great consequence, but not one you can undo. You tried to steady your breath. You had already learned one painful truth in this cursed place. Every action, every choice came at a cost. But was that the nature of this forest? To make you question your very essence, to pull you into an endless spiral of choices that demanded more than you were willing to give? The forest itself was not the only thing that was alive here. You were being shaped by it. The more you struggled, the more you fought to escape its grip, the more you felt yourself slipping into its web. Your memories felt distant, like fragments of a shattered dream, but that nagging voice, the forest's voice, kept pushing you toward the circle, urging you to cross through, to leave behind what you once were. It was a choice that would shape the course of your very existence. You seek to escape the curse, but do you understand what it means to be free? The voice's tone had shifted now, deepening, as if it were revealing a terrible truth, something buried under centuries of silence. To pass through the doorway is to forget. To let go of the world you once knew, to erase yourself from time and space. On the other side you will find peace, but only in the forgetting. You felt the roots coil tighter around your feet, as though they were urging you to make a decision. They were patient, like the forest itself, but you knew that if you did not act soon, you would be consumed by them, just like everyone who had come before you. The idea of forgetting everything, of leaving behind the world you once knew, gnawed at you. The forest's pull was undeniable. There was no denying that the life you once led, what you remembered of it, seemed so distant now. How could you hold on to something that no longer felt real? How could you cling to memories when the forest's promise of peace and release from pain seemed so seductive? But in your heart you knew better. You knew that forgetting everything, who you were, who you had been, would mean losing something essential. It would be the end of the road, the final surrender to the forest's will. And once you stepped through that doorway, there would be no going back. The cost of knowledge is loss, the voice continued. To walk through the door is to leave behind what has already been forgotten. You would have no past, no future, only the present, only the now. The roots had almost reached your waist, wrapping around your body like a vice. But you didn't feel trapped anymore. You felt the truth in the voice's words. There was no simple answer. If you chose to cross the threshold, to enter whatever lay beyond the forest, you would be choosing to erase yourself, to be free but also to lose everything that made you you. But there was still something inside of you, a flicker of defiance, a piece of light that refused to fade. I will not forget, you whispered, your voice trembling but strong. I will fight. I will not be consumed by this place. And with that thought, the roots that had been constricting around your body suddenly recoiled. The pulse of light from the circle intensified, flooding the clearing with blinding brilliance, and for a moment, you thought you could hear the voices of countless souls, lost within the forest's embrace, crying out to you. But they were not voices of anger, they were voices of warning. As the light reached its peak, a wave of energy radiated outward, pushing the shadows back and shattering the stillness in the air. The roots that had once clung to you were now receding, retreating into the earth like frightened creatures, disappearing into the darkness. The tree at the center of the clearing began to groan, its massive roots shaking violently as if they were alive, and then, suddenly, it broke free. The ground trembled, and the world seemed to split as the roots ripped out of the earth, their massive forms twisting and writhing in the air like serpents in a storm. The tree itself seemed to howl, a long guttural sound that vibrated the very earth beneath your feet. And in that moment, the clearing seemed to explode in a cascade of energy, the light from the circle blazing brighter than anything you had ever seen. And you felt it, the pull. Something was calling to you, pulling at the very fibers of your being. It was not the forest's voice this time. No, it was something older, something that had been waiting for you to choose. It was the sound of freedom, or perhaps something else entirely. In that brief moment of clarity, as the world around you twisted and groaned with the raw energy of the forest's fury, you knew what you had to do. The doorway was open. The choice was yours. The earth trembled violently, the very ground beneath you quaking with such force that you had to fight to keep your footing. The air was alive with static, the energy of the forest surging around you like a storm ready to break. The tree, the one at the heart of the forest, roared, a sound that shook the world itself, its gnarled branches snapping and twisting as if they were reaching for something just beyond the veil of reality. The roots that had once entangled you, squeezing the breath from your lungs, were now retreating, writhing in the air like serpents slithering away from their prey. They were alive, yes, but they were also terrified. For the first time, the forest was afraid. It was as if it had felt something shift, something beyond its power to control. And it wasn't you. It was the doorway. The pulse of light from the ritual circle had reached a fever pitch, its glow now so bright that it burned into your retinas. The shadows that had once surrounded you, creeping with malevolent intent, now shrank back, as if they were being forced into submission by the sheer power of the light. The forest itself seemed to bend and twist in response to the energy that surged from the clearing. And then, amidst the chaos, the voice spoke once more, but this time, it wasn't the whisper of the forest. No, it was something else entirely. A voice older than time, filled with the weight of ancient knowledge. "You stand at the threshold of the unknown," it said, its tone low, like the rumble of thunder in the distance. "And yet, you hesitate. Why?" You didn't answer. You couldn't. The pull of the light, the call of the doorway was too powerful. It seemed to vibrate through your entire being, resonating in your bones, in your very soul. There was something on the other side, something waiting. It was a force beyond anything you could comprehend, beyond the reach of the forest, beyond time itself. "You think you know what awaits you," the voice continued, its tone more insistent now. "But do you truly understand what lies beyond? Beyond the forest? Beyond everything?" The words echoed through your mind, pressing against the walls of your consciousness, threatening to break the fragile resolve you had managed to cling to. What was waiting beyond? Was it freedom? Was it an escape from the forest, from the curse that had bound you since the moment you stepped foot in this place? Or was it something darker, something that would consume you whole, body and soul, just as it had done to all those who had come before? The light from the circle grew brighter still, its brilliance now blinding, and you could feel the edges of reality itself bending under its weight. The air crackled with a strange energy, and for a moment, the forest seemed to pause as though holding its breath, waiting for your next move. "There is no turning back," the voice warned, its tone gentle but final. "Once you cross through the doorway, you will leave everything behind. All that you know, all that you were, will fade into nothingness. What awaits you is unknown, an existence outside of time, beyond the realm of the living and the dead. What you are now, what you have been, will be erased, and you will become something new, something different." The roots that had once tried to ensnare you now shriveled, their twisted forms curling away into the dark soil. The tree, its massive branches reaching into the sky, seemed to bow its head as if acknowledging the inevitable. The forest, once a force of nature so powerful that it seemed invincible, now felt smaller. Its whispers, its influence, were fading, retreating into the shadows. It had been defeated, not by force but by choice. Your heart raced in your chest, a frantic beat that echoed in your ears. The light from the circle pulsed in time with your heartbeat, each throb of energy sending a wave of heat and cold through your body. You could feel the very air around you shiver, vibrating with the force of the doorway's power. The decision was upon you, and you knew that there would be no second chances. Could you walk away? Could you resist the pull of the unknown, the lure of the doorway that promised release, peace, and freedom? Could you endure the weight of the forest's curse, the endless whispers that gnawed at your mind, until you were nothing but a hollow shell? Or could you step through and leave it all behind, sacrificing your past, your memories, your very self, in exchange for something that could be a new beginning, or an eternal darkness? You didn't know which path would lead to salvation, and you had no way of knowing what the consequences would be. The forest's hold on you had already begun to weaken, but that didn't mean it had let go. The doorway was tempting, and with each passing second, you felt yourself slipping closer to its pull, as though it had a magnetic force of its own. You took a deep breath, steadying yourself, grounding your mind. You had made it this far, hadn't you? You had survived the nightmares, the darkness, the whispers. You had fought the forest's grasp, and you had resisted the urge to surrender. But now, standing on the edge of this reality, with everything you had known slipping away, you felt the weight of the decision press down on you like a heavy stone. The voices of the forest, though quieter now, still buzzed at the edges of your mind, urging you to turn back. They warned you that the doorway was not to be trusted, that once you crossed there would be no coming back, that the world you had once known would be lost forever. But there was something else. Something in your heart, a flicker of hope, a whisper of something greater. Something beyond the fear, beyond the darkness. Something that told you there was still a choice, still a chance for redemption, for understanding. You were not ready to give up. Not yet. You stepped forward. The roots recoiled as if in fear of your movement. The tree groaned, its twisted bark creaking under the strain of the energy that surrounded it. The light from the circle flared one last time, bright enough to sear your vision, and in that moment you felt it, the doorway opening. It was not a door, not a physical thing you could touch. It was a gap in reality itself, a rift in time and space that you could see, feel, and enter. The edges of it shimmered with an iridescent glow, like the surface of water disturbed by a passing breeze. Through it you could glimpse something vast, something other. It was a place of endless possibility, a space where time was meaningless, where the laws of nature no longer applied. You could feel it, feel the pull of the doorway growing stronger, like the wind that drags you to the edge of the ocean's tide. There was no going back now. The only way out was through. With one final breath, you stepped into the circle. The moment you stepped into the circle, the world as you knew it shattered. The ground beneath you seemed to dissolve, and the very air around you bent and warped as if it were made of liquid. There was no sound, no movement, just a profound stillness that swallowed everything whole. The sensation was like falling, but not falling through space. It was more like being drawn into something so deep, so vast, that it transcended the very concept of gravity. The light from the ritual circle, which had once burned so bright, now flickered, then faded completely. The harsh brilliance that had seared your vision gave way to a soft, ethereal glow that bathed the space around you in a cool, otherworldly light. For a moment, you felt weightless, as though you were neither standing nor falling, simply suspended in a space that was both everywhere and nowhere. The transition was not a smooth one. It was more like being pulled apart and remade, as if your very essence were being reconfigured by forces beyond your comprehension. Your senses felt distorted, pulled in all directions at once. The sharp, cold air of the forest, the roots, the shadows, vanished, replaced by something else, something neither cold nor warm but utterly neutral. You felt untethered, as if the laws that governed your body, your thoughts, and your very existence no longer applied. You could still feel the echo of the forest, its whispers lingering faintly at the edges of your consciousness, but they were fading. The weight of its oppressive presence was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar stillness. The doorway had closed behind you and there was no going back now. You were somewhere else. But where? As your senses adjusted to the new reality, you began to perceive the space around you. It was not a place, at least not in the way you understood places. It was not a room, nor a field, nor even a sky. It was a vast, endless expanse of nothing, yet not nothing in the truest sense of the word. It was as if you were suspended in a space that existed between all things, where time had no meaning and the very concept of solid matter was irrelevant. There was no horizon, no edges, no up or down, just infinite space stretching out in every direction. But it wasn't empty. No, there were things here. Shapes, movements, faint, ghostly silhouettes that shifted just beyond the reach of your perception. They weren't solid figures, more like phantoms that lingered at the edges of the void, just out of sight. And they weren't alone. There were sounds, too, faint, discordant hums that reverberated through the air like the vibrations of a string instrument being plucked from a distance. You felt a strange pull toward one of the shapes, an almost magnetic attraction. It was different from the forest pull, not oppressive but compelling. Something told you to move toward it. It was not the same feeling of dread, nor the familiar tension of the forest's dark embrace. No, this was different, this was inviting. You took a hesitant step forward, but the act of movement felt strange in this place, as if your steps were somehow irrelevant to your forward motion. The feeling of displacement was profound. With every movement, it was as if the very concept of direction was being rewritten. You were walking, but you were also suspended in a timeless space, and yet the shape, a shifting, glowing form, pulled you toward it. The closer you got, the more the shape began to solidify. It wasn't human, nor was it anything you had ever seen before. It was a being of light, a glowing form that rippled and changed, like liquid metal poured into the shape of a person. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, no discernible characteristics. But it was aware. You could feel its presence as strongly as you could feel your own. When you were close enough, it spoke, not with words but with thoughts, directly into your mind as if it bypassed your ears altogether. The communication was strange, not in a language you could understand, but in feelings, emotions, and fragmented images. The sensations were overwhelming at first, but you couldn't look away. You have crossed the threshold, it thought to you. Its presence was deep, resonating with something ancient and powerful, like a being that had existed long before the world was born, yet it felt familiar. What you seek is not here, it continued, its thoughts piercing through your consciousness. What you seek is beyond. Beyond? What did it mean? You tried to focus, but the sense of disorientation was still heavy, a persistent hum in the back of your mind. You have left the forest, it continued, but the forest is but a reflection, a gateway to this place. You have chosen to leave behind what was, to enter what is. The question now is, will you embrace it or will you turn back? You paused. The words seemed to reach you on a deeper level than mere communication. This being, this entity of light, was offering something, but you couldn't quite grasp what it was. Your mind felt like a foggy mirror, the reflection just out of reach. Your path is not set, it spoke again, a ripple of energy passing through its glowing form. You have stepped into a place beyond time. You are no longer bound by the laws of your world. Here, the past is only a memory, and the future is an unfolding possibility. What you leave behind has already been forgotten, but what you choose now will shape all that is yet to come. A memory. You had left something behind, something fundamental. The forest, the lodge, the roots, the whispers, the curse, it was all gone. Yet the strange pull of the forest, the haunting whispers, still clung to the edges of your thoughts, like the remnants of a bad dream that refused to fade. Was this truly freedom, or was it just another form of imprisonment? The being's presence intensified as if it sensed your confusion. What you left behind is not what you think it is, it continued. The forest was a prison of your own making. You have walked through the doorway, and now you must choose whether to remain in this space, a space of potential, or return to the world of your memories, to the life you once knew. Something deep inside you stirred. The idea of returning to your old life, of stepping back into the world that had once been yours, felt strange. It wasn't the life you had left behind, not really. That world felt distant, foreign, as though it had belonged to someone else. And yet, there was a part of you that longed for it, for the comfort of the known, for the illusion of normalcy. What if I stay here? You asked, your voice trembling as you tried to comprehend the magnitude of what you were hearing. The being seemed to pause, its form rippling like water disturbed by a breeze. Then you would become one with the beyond, it replied. You would lose all that you were, but you would be free to become something new, something that transcends what you once were. You would be free of all that bound you in the forest, free of fear, free of time, free of the past. But you would also be forgotten. Forgotten. The word echoed in your mind like a death knell. To be free, but to lose everything that had made you you? Was that truly freedom? Or was it a cruel illusion? And if I return? You asked, your voice barely above a whisper. The being's form rippled again, and you felt its energy grow even more intense, as if it were drawing from some deep, unfathomable well. If you return, you will carry with you the weight of what you have learned, it said, its thoughts resonating with the weight of ancient wisdom. The forest is not gone. The doorway is still open, but it will change. What you have crossed will remain with you, etched into your very being. You will live with the knowledge of what lies beyond, and that knowledge will shape you. You may never be the same, but you will have the power to shape your own path. You will know that you are more than the forest, more than the curse. You will know the truth. Truth. The word rang in your ears. The truth about the forest? The truth about this place? The truth about you? You stood there, suspended in the infinite space between what was and what could be. The pull to stay, to embrace the beyond, was undeniable. But the pull to return, to keep the memories, to carry the weight of the truth with you, was just as strong. And you realized something in that moment. No matter which path you chose, you would have to carry it with you. The doorway had opened, but the decision, your decision, was still yours to make. The endless expanse of this place stretched around you like a canvas of stars, infinite and incomprehensible. The being of light before you shifted, its form fluid, ethereal, and yet full of undeniable presence. Every movement rippled through the air like a delicate breeze, and every word that emanated from it seemed to vibrate with an ancient truth that reached deep into your core. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on your chest, its gravity pulling at your soul. The being had given you a choice, a decision that carried consequences far beyond what you had ever imagined. To remain in this space, to transcend your former self and become something else. Something beyond the bounds of time, beyond the constraints of the forest, the lodge, and even the curse. Or to return to the world you knew, carrying the knowledge of this place, of what lay beyond, and the truth of your journey. Both options held a pull that was undeniable. The idea of remaining here, free from the constraints of your old life, of the past that had once defined you, was intoxicating. It was the promise of freedom, of shedding the weight of all that had haunted you. To exist beyond time and memory, to transcend the cycles that had bound you, to leave behind the whispers and the shadows of the forest forever. There was something pure about it, something clean, a slate wiped free of the burdens of fear, doubt, and pain. But then there was the other path, the one that beckoned you back, that pulled at you with the knowledge that you could carry the truth of this place with you. The truth about the forest, about the doorway, about yourself. The idea of returning felt strange, but there was something deeply human about it. The pull to know, to remember, to carry that knowledge and shape your own future with it. The idea that you could return to the world, to life, and still be connected to the wisdom you had gained, still carry the echoes of what you had learned here. Was it worth the cost? Could you reconcile the two? Could you continue to live while knowing what lay beyond, while knowing that you would never be the same again? You are torn, the being spoke again, and its voice was softer this time, gentler. There was a note of understanding in its tone, as if it had seen this struggle unfold countless times before. You know that there is no true escape from the path you have walked. Once you have crossed the threshold, there is no return to what was. You are forever changed. You shuddered at the thought. The idea that you could never return to the life you once knew, the life before the lodge, before the forest, felt like a door closing forever. The memories you held so dear, the life you had lived, seemed to blur and fade into the distant recesses of your mind, as though they belonged to someone else, someone who no longer existed. But you also know, the being continued, that you are not bound by the past. The future is fluid. You are the one who shapes it now. It was a strange comfort hearing those words. The idea that you could choose what would come next, that the future wasn't fixed, that you had the power to shape it, was a revelation that caused something deep within you to stir. You weren't just a victim of fate. You were the author of your own story. The being before you shifted again, its form elongating, becoming even more fluid, more indistinct, like a liquid thought slipping through your fingers. But its presence remained as strong as ever. The truth is this, it said, you cannot remain in this space and hold on to what you were. You cannot leave here unchanged. If you choose to remain, you will become something beyond what you can even imagine. The forest, the world you knew, will be a distant memory, an echo in the void. You will transcend time and you will lose all that you were, but you will also gain something greater. You will become a part of the universe, of the space between all things. The words echoed in your mind, stirring something deep inside you. The idea of becoming something greater, of transcending what you had been, was undeniably powerful. But what did it mean to lose yourself in the process? Would the forest, the curse, the lodge, would all of that simply fade into nothingness? Could you truly let go of all that you had experienced, all that you had endured? And yet, there was something alluring about it, the thought of freedom from everything. The idea of stepping outside of the cycle of life and death, of becoming a part of the very fabric of existence itself. To be free from the whispers, free from the weight of the past. To be unbound. But if you choose to return, the being continued, you will carry this place within you. You will bear the knowledge of the forest, the truth of the doorway, and the weight of your own transformation. You will not forget and you will never be the same. But you will have the power to shape the future, to create a life from the ruins of the past. The weight of the words hung heavily in the air. The idea of returning, of keeping the memories of everything you had learned, of carrying the truth of this place with you, felt like a responsibility. It was a burden, but it was also power. The power to change the world, to change yourself, to create a new path. This is your choice, the being said, its voice becoming even more distant, as if it were fading into the fabric of reality itself. But remember, once you make your decision, there is no going back. You will be what you choose to be. The doorway is open, but time is slipping away. The moment seemed to stretch on forever. You stood in the vast emptiness, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. The doorway was still there, a shimmering rift in the fabric of reality, a gateway to an existence beyond comprehension. The world of the forest, the world of the lodge, of the curse, was a distant memory fading with each passing second. You could still feel its pull, but it was weaker now. The unknown, the beyond, was calling you, and you could feel the temptation to step through, to leave it all behind and become something greater. But there was another pull, one that called you back to the world you had known, to the life you had once lived. The world might be broken, fractured, but it was still your world. The memories, the pain, the struggles, and the triumphs, they were yours. To return would be to carry them with you, to shape the future with the knowledge you had gained. You closed your eyes, feeling the pull of both choices, each one as powerful as the other. And in that moment of silence, of suspended time, you knew that this was the crossroads of your existence. This was the moment that would define you forever. With a deep breath, you opened your eyes and made your choice. The air was still, pregnant with the silence of the infinite expanse. It seemed as though time had stopped entirely, the hum of existence falling silent in reverence for the decision you were about to make. You stood on the precipice of something vast, something ancient, the weight of your choice pressing down on your shoulders like a mantle too heavy to bear. The being of light, the entity that had once seemed so distant, so incomprehensible, now felt closer, its presence pulsing around you like the very heartbeat of this place, of this moment. For what felt like eternity, you stood there, suspended in this space beyond time, surrounded by the echoes of possibilities. You could feel the memory of the forest, of the lodge, of the curse, lingering just behind your thoughts, ghosts of a life you had left behind. It was hard to tell if they were fading or if they were becoming a part of you, woven into the very fabric of your being. The pull of the beyond, of the doorway, still called to you, its invitation almost overwhelming, but so too did the pull to return, to carry the knowledge and the wisdom you had gained back into the world you had known, the world you had left behind. You could feel the truth of the being's words deep within you now. Once you make your choice, there is no going back. It was not simply a decision about the future. It was a transformation of who you were, who you had been. Everything you knew about yourself, your life, your struggles, all of it would be either cast aside like dead leaves or carried forward, imbued with the knowledge of this strange, otherworldly place. This was not about an escape, it was about becoming something else. Something new. Something unbound. You closed your eyes for a moment, the stillness of the void surrounding you. The whispers of the forest, the weight of the curse, the tension of the lodge, all seemed to fade for an instant as you breathed deeply. The air was cold, crisp, but it was neither oppressive nor comforting. It simply was as though it was beyond feeling. You opened your eyes, the vastness of the void stretched out before you, empty, but full of infinite possibilities. You felt that strange pull again, the desire to step through the doorway, to shed everything you had been and become something greater. You could feel it, freedom. True freedom. The kind of freedom that transcended time and place, beyond the struggles, beyond the fears, beyond the pain. And yet, the weight of the past was not so easily dismissed. It lingered in your chest, heavy as a stone, pressing against your ribs. You had fought so hard to reach this point. You had struggled through the forest, through the curse, through the endless whispers and shadows. You had survived the terror of the lodge, of the roots, of the endless night. Everything that had happened, every hardship, every sorrow, every fleeting moment of joy, had shaped who you were. Could you really walk away from all of that? Could you truly leave behind the world that had defined you, the life that had once been yours, even if it was imperfect? The being's presence seemed to grow more palpable as your thoughts continued to churn. It was not pushing you, not urging you to decide. No, this was not about pressure. It was about understanding. It was waiting for you to realize that the choice was never about the door itself. It was about the path you had already walked to get here. Every step you have taken has led you to this moment. The being whispered, though you could feel its words reach deep within you, not through sound but through the very essence of your being. The doorway is not just a place. It is a reflection of you. You must choose. Will you embrace what you have learned, or will you let it all fade away? Its words echoed in your mind, and the reality of them began to sink in. You had fought so hard to escape the forest, to free yourself from the grasp of the curse, to survive. But was that truly freedom? Was the act of leaving behind everything you had ever known really the answer? The truth was, you had never been truly bound by the forest. You had been shaped by it, yes, but you had never been its prisoner. The whispers, the shadows, the dark corners of the lodge, they were all reflections of your own fear, your own doubts, your own inability to accept change. The forest was just a manifestation of the struggles that lived within you. The path you had walked, the choices you had made, had always been about finding who you really were, not about running from what haunted you. You took a deep breath and something inside you clicked. You were not the same person who had stumbled into that lodge, unaware of what lay ahead. You were not the same person who had walked through the forest, terrified of what you would become. You had learned something about yourself, about the nature of fear, of choice, of freedom. You had learned that the path wasn't about escaping the past. It was about embracing it. And that was the choice. You didn't need to leave everything behind. You didn't need to become something else entirely to find peace. The power of your transformation was not about forgetting, it was about integrating what you had learned, using the wisdom you had gained to shape your path forward. You turned back toward the doorway, toward the infinite expanse that lay beyond it. The pull was still there, still inviting, but now you saw it for what it was. An escape, yes, but also a loss. A loss of self, of identity, of the very essence that made you you. Instead, you turned your gaze upward toward the being of light, still suspended in the vast void around you. Its glow was warm, steady, like a beacon in the dark. You knew now that the true path was not to leave everything behind, but to carry it with you, to use it. You could transcend the forest and the curse, but not by erasing your past. You could transcend it by understanding it, by accepting the power it had given you, and by using it to shape the future. I choose to return, you whispered, the words emerging from a place deep inside you, a place of clarity and resolve. The being of light seemed to ripple, its glow intensifying for just a moment, as though it were acknowledging your choice, understanding the depth of what you had decided. It did not speak, but the energy around you shifted, and the silence of the void seemed to grow softer, more inviting. So it is, it thought to you, its presence now a warm embrace. You have chosen the path of the awakened. You will carry this place within you as you carry your past, your memories. You will not forget, but you will be stronger for it. The doorway behind you began to shimmer, the edges of reality warping and twisting as the rift between worlds opened once more. The being's presence began to recede, but not in a way that felt distant. It was still there, as though it had always been a part of you, and it would remain with you no matter where you went. You took a deep breath, feeling the calmness of your decision wash over you. You had made your choice, and with it, you knew there was no turning back. But there was no fear now. Only a sense of peace, a deep, profound understanding that you had found your path, and that the journey, no matter how difficult, was worth it. The doorway loomed before you, a portal to a world that had been waiting for you to return. A world of memories, of pain, of growth. A world where you would shape your future with the knowledge you had gained, and where you would carry the lessons of the forest, the lodge, and the curse with you, as both a burden and a strength. And with that, you stepped forward. The moment you crossed the threshold, stepping through the shimmering doorway, everything shifted. The world as you knew it, a place of trees, of whispers, of shadowed paths, faded behind you, leaving only the feeling of a deep, stretching calm. It wasn't like waking up from a dream or stepping into a new life. It was more like re-entering your own story. As though you had momentarily stepped outside of time, only to return with the knowledge that the pages of your life were still being written. You found yourself standing not in the endless expanse of the void, nor in the labyrinthine dark of the forest, but somewhere familiar, yet distant. The world that greeted you was not the world you had left. It was the same but changed. The sky was not the same blue you had last seen, nor was the air as heavy with the scent of rain-soaked soil. There was a stillness here, a strange calmness, as though the land itself were holding its breath, waiting. The sun, hanging low in the sky, bathed everything in a soft, golden light that felt both warm and distant, as if the warmth were only a memory that had lingered a little too long. The forest, the lodge, the roots, you could feel their presence behind you, pulling at the edges of your mind. But they were fading, retreating into the distance, and their hold on you seemed weaker now. The whispering voices that had once haunted your every step were distant echoes, like the soft murmurs of a storm that had long since passed. You could hear them still, faint and far away, but they no longer controlled you. You had left them behind. And yet you knew that they had changed you. They had shaped you like a sculptor shaping clay. The choices you had made in the lodge, in the forest, in the depths of that mysterious expanse, they had all been pieces of a puzzle, and now you could see the picture taking shape. You were no longer the same person who had first ventured into that cursed place, lost and unaware. No, you were something different now. The world you returned to was familiar, but it was not the same. The trees still stood tall, the wind still rustled through the leaves, and the ground beneath your feet was the same solid earth you had always known. But there was a sense of newness in the air, an unfamiliarity. The forest, while still alive, seemed to be holding something back, as though it were afraid to speak, afraid to give away its secrets too soon. You stood there for a long time, just breathing in the air, taking in the soft, golden light. It felt like the world was waiting for you to decide what to do next. You had crossed the threshold. You had chosen to return. But the question now was, what would you do with the knowledge you had gained? How would you live with the truth you carried inside of you? The path before you stretched out, winding through the trees, leading somewhere you didn't know. But it wasn't just the path, it was everything. The world itself had changed. It had shifted somehow. The forest still held its secrets, but it wasn't the same forest you had first walked into. It had transformed too, and so had you. You began to walk, each step a soft crunch against the dry earth beneath your feet. As you moved, the world seemed to unfold around you. The trees, the grass, the air, they all felt different now, touched by the knowledge you had gained in that other place in the doorway. It was as though everything in the world was connected, woven together by threads that you could now see, threads that had always been there but were once hidden from your sight. As you walked, the landscape around you seemed to shift with each step. The trees, once so familiar, now seemed to whisper in a language you could almost understand. The wind carried the faintest traces of voices, but now they felt more like guides than threats. You could almost hear their messages, like distant memories calling you forward. The earth itself seemed to welcome you back, acknowledging that you had changed and that you were no longer the same. You felt the presence of the being, the entity of light, still with you, not as a shadow but as an understanding, as a connection that ran deeper than anything physical. It was not a voice that you could hear, but a feeling, a gentle hum in the back of your mind, a reminder that you were not alone, that you were always becoming. You came to a clearing, a familiar place, though you couldn't remember having seen it before. It was a small meadow, the grasses swaying gently in the breeze, the sunlight filtering through the trees in dappled patterns across the ground. The air was cool, and the scent of wildflowers mixed with the earthy smell of the forest. And there, in the center of the clearing, stood a single stone, weathered and ancient, with intricate carvings etched deep into its surface. The carvings were familiar to you now, as if you had seen them before in another place, another time. They spoke of ancient forces, of cycles of life and death, of paths chosen and unchosen, of freedom and chains. You knelt beside the stone, running your fingers over the carvings, feeling the depth of the history they held. It was strange, this stone had not been here before. But it felt like a marker, like a signpost on your journey. A reminder that you were not simply returning to the life you had known. You were returning with something more, something that would change the world around you for better or for worse. You stood, your eyes fixed on the stone, and you realized that the choice to return had been more than just a return to your old life. It had been a rebirth, a new beginning. You had not left the past behind, not fully, but you had learned to carry it with you, to shape it into something that would guide you forward. You had returned, but you were not the same person who had left. You were no longer bound by fear, by the whispers of the forest, by the weight of the curse. You were free. And yet, the knowledge you carried with you, the wisdom of the forest, the truth of the doorway, was both a gift and a burden that would shape your every step. As you stood there, in that quiet meadow, you realized that the world had been waiting for you. The future was yours to shape, and with the knowledge you had gained, you now had the power to rewrite the story. You could live a life that was free from the shadows, a life where you could take the lessons of the past and use them to build something new, something stronger, something real. And yet, as you stood there, you could feel it. The forest was still there. The echoes of the past, the whispers of what you had left behind, were still with you. But now they no longer controlled you. They were no longer your chains. They were a part of you, woven into the fabric of who you were. And you were stronger for it. The future stretched out before you, vast and unknown. But you were no longer afraid of it. You had faced the darkness, faced the forest, faced the truth of what lay beyond, and you had emerged not unscathed but transformed. You knew that you would never forget the lessons you had learned. You would carry them with you as a guide, as a compass, as a source of strength. And with that, you took your first step forward into the world that awaited you, knowing that the journey was far from over. But this time you walked with purpose. You walked as someone changed. And as you moved, the world seemed to open up before you, ready for the next chapter of your story. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the meadow. The stone at your feet, etched with symbols and history, remained in your mind, a permanent marker of the choice you had made. The ground beneath you felt alive, warm, like it had always been waiting for you to return. The air, too, seemed to hum with energy, a soft resonance that mirrored the thrum of your own heartbeat. But as you stood there, the echoes of the forest still whispered in the back of your mind. The knowledge you had gained, the truth of the doorway, and the power that had surged through you when you crossed it. These things were now a part of you, woven into the very fabric of your being. You were no longer just a person. You were a bridge between two worlds, the world you had left behind and the one you had discovered on the other side of the doorway. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees around you. It was not the soft, gentle breeze you remembered from before. It was a deeper wind, one that carried with it the faintest hint of something else, something ancient. The sound of it was not unlike the rustling of the forest whispers, but now it was different. It wasn't a warning or a threat, it was a call, a beckoning. You turned away from the stone, sensing that your journey had not truly ended. No, you had returned to the world, but the world you had come back to was not the same. The land was different. The people were different. And most importantly, you were different. The path before you wound through the trees, and you felt an unspoken pull to follow it, though you didn't know where it would lead. Every step you took felt like a step away from what you had been, and yet, with each movement, you felt more grounded. The knowledge of the beyond was no longer distant. It was part of you, integrated into your very soul. You had always known that you were not like the others, that there was something different about you, something that set you apart. The forest had shown you that, and now it was clear. The truth was, you had never truly belonged to the world you had come from. You were part of something larger, something beyond the confines of time, of place, and even of life and death. You had seen the threads of existence, the weavings of fate, and now you knew that your path was yours to shape. But that knowledge, that understanding, came with its own burden. You were no longer the person you had been, and though you had freed yourself from the grip of the forest, from the curse that had once threatened to consume you, the world you had returned to still bore its own scars. There were forces at work, forces you didn't fully understand yet, that still sought to manipulate, control, and twist the very fabric of reality. And you, with the knowledge you carried, had become a part of that equation. As you walked, you felt the presence of the being of light with you, its energy still a quiet hum at the edge of your awareness. It had not abandoned you, it was woven into the very world you now inhabited. It was a silent guide, a force of balance that you could feel but never fully see. And with it came the knowledge that you were no longer walking alone. The path led you deeper into the forest, but this was not the same place it had once been. The trees, once oppressive and dark, now seemed to breathe with life. The air was thick with the scent of earth and wood, the soft crunch of leaves beneath your feet. It was a living thing, the forest, but it was not the same forest. It had been reshaped, transformed by your journey, by the decisions you had made, and by the choices of countless others who had walked these paths before you. In the distance you saw a flicker of light, a fire. It was not far, but it was enough to draw you in. You quickened your pace, your curiosity piqued by the soft glow that seemed to pulse in the distance, a warmth in the cool evening air. As you drew closer, you saw the source of the light, a small campfire, its flames crackling and dancing in the air. Around it sat a group of figures, their faces hidden in shadow. They were gathered around the fire, speaking in hushed tones. But there was something about them that felt familiar, something that made your heart skip a beat as though you had seen them before. You approached cautiously, the crackling of the fire growing louder in your ears. The figures did not turn to acknowledge you at first, but as you stepped closer, one of them looked up. It was a woman, her face obscured by the shadows of her hood. She wore a cloak of deep green, and her eyes gleamed with a knowing light. There was something about her that immediately struck you, something ancient, something that felt like it was from the other side. "You have returned," she said, her voice soft but carrying an unmistakable authority. There was a calmness in her tone, but also a weight, as if she had been waiting for you. She did not speak in question, it was a statement. And you knew in that moment that she had known you would come. The figures around the fire shifted slightly, but they said nothing. They too seemed to recognize you, though they did not yet speak. The woman stood slowly, her movements graceful and fluid, like the wind through the trees. She extended her hand toward you, her fingers slender but strong, her eyes never leaving yours. "You have made a choice," she continued, "but you know as well as I do that the path you now walk is not without its dangers." You felt a surge of something, recognition, but it was fleeting, like a shadow passing over your thoughts. "Who are you?" you asked, your voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange, foreign, as though the very act of speaking had changed since your journey through the doorway. "We are the Watchers," the woman replied. "The keepers of the balance, the ones who guide those who walk the paths between worlds." The fire flickered brightly as she spoke, casting shadows that seemed to dance and shift on their own. The other figures remained silent, watching you with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, eyes filled with ancient knowledge. "The balance," you echoed. The words had weight, and suddenly the world around you seemed to hold its breath. You had felt the shift, the subtle change in the air, the hum of something much larger than yourself. What do you mean? She smiled softly, but there was something unreadable in her expression. You have stepped into a world where the threads of fate are not fixed, but woven by those who know how to weave them. You too are now one of the weavers. The path you have chosen to walk will affect more than just your world. It will affect all worlds. The words hung in the air, heavy and laden with meaning. You stood there, caught in the realization that what you had learned, what you had become, was not just about you. It was about something much larger, something that spanned beyond your understanding. You are not alone, she continued, her gaze softening. There are others who walk the same path, others who have crossed the thresholds of reality. You are part of a greater whole, a movement toward balance. But be warned, there are forces, dark forces, that seek to unravel that balance. The other figures shifted once more, their movements synchronized, but their faces remained shrouded in shadow. We are watching, the woman said. And now so are you. You nodded slowly, taking in her words. It was a lot to absorb, too much maybe, but it all made sense in a way. Your journey had not ended when you returned to this world. No, it had only just begun. The balance was fragile and you had a role to play. A shiver ran down your spine as the fire crackled, and for a moment, the night seemed to pulse with a strange, foreboding energy. But it was not fear you felt, it was a call. The threads of fate, the threads of your journey, had been set into motion, and there was no turning back now. The world awaited you. And the forces at work, both light and dark, would soon make their presence known. The fire crackled in the center of the clearing, its embers casting fleeting shadows across the faces of the watchers. Their silent, unwavering presence was overwhelming, and you could feel the weight of their gaze on you, as though they were not just watching you but assessing you. There was something ancient in the way they stood, the way they moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that spoke of lifetimes, of centuries of knowledge, of unspoken understanding. The woman who had spoken to you, the one who had called herself one of the watchers, continued to stand by the fire, her eyes locked onto yours. There was a softness in her gaze now, but also something else, something deep, like an ocean beneath calm waters. She was waiting, and you were, in some strange way, waiting too. You could feel the ground beneath you shift, not in any physical sense, but in a way that seemed to resonate deep within your bones. The threads of reality, of fate, were being pulled taut, and the world itself seemed to lean in, holding its breath, as if anticipating what would happen next. You have returned, she repeated, this time more slowly, as if letting the weight of those words sink deeper into your consciousness. But you have returned with knowledge. Knowledge of the beyond. Knowledge of what lies beyond time, beyond the veil. You carry the truth within you now. The words felt heavier this time, more loaded. Truth. It was a concept that had once seemed so simple, so clear. But now, after everything you had experienced, after crossing that threshold, after confronting the forest, the lodge, the curse, and the being of light, truth felt elusive, almost impossible to define. You had learned so much, but each piece of knowledge only seemed to open up more questions. The truth was not something you could simply know. It was something that could be felt, something that could only be understood by walking the path and seeing its effects. The balance, you said quietly, recalling her earlier words. What do you mean by that? What do you mean about the threads of fate? And what does it mean that I'm a part of it now? The watcher's eyes softened, and she slowly lowered herself to sit by the fire, her cloak rustling like the whisper of leaves. The others followed her, their movements synchronized, their faces still shrouded in the shadows of their hoods. One of them, a man with a long dark beard, seemed to shift slightly, his eyes glinting beneath his hood, but he remained silent. The world is a web, the woman began, her voice steady, each word carrying a rhythm that seemed to echo in the space between the stars. It is a web of interwoven threads, each one representing a life, a choice, a path. Everything is connected, every action, every thought, every breath. The forest, the lodge, the curse you carried, the doorways you crossed, these are all threads in that web. And you now are part of that web. Her words settled around you like a heavy mist, each one a revelation, yet they only served to deepen the mystery. The web of life, of fate, of existence itself, the very idea seemed both overwhelming and familiar. You had always felt as though something greater was at play, something unseen, something that connected everything. Now it was clear. You were no longer just a single thread pulled along by external forces. You had become a weaver. You are no longer the person who simply walks the paths of this world, the woman continued, her voice like the soft rustle of wind through branches. You are now one who understands how those paths are woven. You have seen the threads that lie beneath the surface, the paths that stretch through time, through existence. You have seen the beginning and the end. And now, you must decide what to do with that knowledge. Her gaze pierced you as though she were searching for something deep inside you, looking for something you couldn't yet name. You are no longer bound by the past, but you must now choose what you will become, she added. Will you use this knowledge to shape the future, or will you allow the threads of fate to continue to weave themselves without interference? You have the power now. You can guide the paths of others, or you can leave the web as it is, allowing time to flow as it will. But be warned, every thread you pull will change the course of events. Nothing will be the same again. A chill ran down your spine. The weight of her words seemed to echo through the very fabric of the world itself, vibrating in your bones. You could feel the web, feel the threads pulsing with the life of countless others, their destinies intertwined with yours. It was a heady, intoxicating thought. The power to shape reality, to alter the future. This was not the same as escaping the forest or walking away from the lodge. This was something deeper, more profound. The knowledge of the future was not simply an understanding of what would come. It was the ability to influence it, to create it. But with that power came a weight, a responsibility. If you altered one thread, would you unravel another? If you pulled one path tighter, would you risk the collapse of others? The very idea of controlling such a delicate, intricate web was terrifying. The consequences of your actions, every decision, every shift, could have rippling effects throughout the web of existence. Why me? You asked quietly. Why am I the one who has been chosen for this? The watcher gave a small, enigmatic smile. You are not the only one to walk the path of the weaver, she said, her eyes glinting with a hint of something ancient, something far older than your understanding. There have been others and there will be more. But you are the one who has crossed the threshold. You are the one who has seen the truth, and who has returned with the knowledge to alter the course of fate. That is why you were called. That is why you are. The silence that followed her words was heavy with meaning. Your mind spun, trying to grasp the full weight of what she was telling you. You were no longer just a victim of fate, a wanderer lost in the woods. You were now part of it. The web of fate had opened itself to you, and you were standing at its center, holding the threads in your hands. And what you did next could change everything. Tell me more about the others, you said, your voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling inside you. Who are they? And what happened to them? The watcher's gaze darkened for a moment, and she leaned closer to the fire, her fingers brushing the flames without any sign of harm. The others are scattered, she said softly, her voice quieter now as if recalling something painful. Some walked away from the web, choosing to live in ignorance of what they had learned. Others became consumed by the power they wielded, losing themselves to the very threads they sought to control. And a few have disappeared entirely, lost to the currents of fate they tried to manipulate. She paused, the firelight flickering in her eyes. Not all who cross this threshold can handle the weight of what they know. The threads of fate are not to be taken lightly. Those who choose to weave them must do so with wisdom, with care. Because once you pull at a thread, you may find that it is impossible to untangle what you have set in motion. You swallowed, your mind racing with the implications. The power to alter the web, the knowledge of the future, the weight of every decision, it was all far greater than anything you had ever imagined. You were standing at the precipice of a new life, a life that was no longer bound by the limitations of time, by the choices of others. You were no longer just a passenger in your own story. You were the one holding the pen. But with that power came a deep, unspoken responsibility. The watchers, the weavers of fate, had seen the consequences of others who had tried to control the web. And now it was your turn. You must decide now, the watcher said, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. What will you do with the threads that you now hold? Will you shape the future or let it be? Her words hung in the air like the last note of a song that would decide the fate of not just your world, but all the worlds that existed within the web. The fire crackled softly, casting its dancing shadows across your face as you sat on the edge of the clearing, the weight of the watcher's words pressing down on you like an invisible force. The silence hung thick in the air, as though the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for you to make the choice that would shape the world itself. The threads of fate, you now understood, were not just invisible strands that tied people together. They were alive, twisting, pulsing, shifting with every decision, every breath, every step. The web of existence was not a passive thing. It was a living, breathing entity, and you were now a part of it. The weight of this understanding settled in your chest, heavy as a stone, but somehow also exhilarating. You felt the pulse of the web, the hum of its threads under your skin, like the very heartbeat of the universe. And yet, despite the power that coursed through you, despite the vastness of the knowledge you had gained, you still found yourself lost, uncertain. The future lay before you like an endless, winding path, and you could see every possible route, every possibility, every outcome. It was overwhelming, impossible to fully grasp. What was the right choice? What path should you take? The web was vast, and you could not see every thread, every connection. Even now, as you stood at the center of it, you could feel the distance between you and the edges of the world, the parts you did not yet understand, the dark corners where fate had hidden itself away. The woman, the watcher, was watching you, her gaze steady and patient. She had not spoken since her last words, but you could feel her presence like a quiet reassurance, as though she was waiting for you to find your own answer. Finally, you spoke, your voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling inside you. "I understand the power I hold now," you said, your voice echoing softly in the stillness of the forest. "But how do I use it? How do I shape the future when it feels like the web is too large? How do I know where to begin?" The watcher smiled softly, though there was a deep sadness in her eyes. She stood slowly, her movements fluid as she took a step closer to the fire. The light flickered across her face, illuminating the lines of wisdom etched into her features. "The question you ask is one that every weaver must face," she said. "The web is vast, yes, and it stretches across countless worlds, countless timelines. But you do not have to weave all of it at once. Start small, start close. The threads you control are not the entire web, they are the threads you choose to touch, the paths you decide to influence." Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable power in it, a quiet certainty that resonated deep within you. The web is not just a place of power. It is a place of balance. Each thread you touch will cause ripples, yes, but it is those ripples that shape the future. You do not have to change everything. All you need to do is choose the threads that call to you. You felt the weight of her words, and for the first time, the vastness of the task before you seemed a little less overwhelming. The web was not something to conquer. It was something to guide. It was not about controlling every thread, but about making the right choices, the right pulls, the right shifts. Small decisions, made with care and wisdom, could have ripple effects that would shape the course of existence. Every action, the watcher continued, her voice low, no matter how small, creates ripples in the web. Every word spoken, every step taken. The web is alive and it responds to you. But remember, the power you wield is not absolute. You are a part of the web, not outside of it. Your choices are intertwined with those of others, and the balance must be maintained. You cannot tip the scales too far in one direction without consequences. You nodded slowly, the enormity of her words settling into your bones. The power to weave the threads of fate was not something to be taken lightly. You could influence the world, yes, but you were still a part of it. The web was not just a tool, it was a living, breathing force, and you were merely a thread within it. The choice was yours to make, but the consequences of that choice were shared by all. The fire crackled again, sending a shower of sparks into the air, and for a brief moment, the shadows of the forest seemed to shift, as though the very trees were watching you, waiting for your next move. "Do you understand now?" the watcher asked, her eyes piercing through the dim light. "The path you walk is one of great power, but it is also one of great responsibility. The choices you make will not only shape your future, they will shape the futures of others. And once you begin, there is no turning back." The weight of her words hung in the air like a dense fog. You were at the crossroads now, and the choices ahead of you were vast. But the uncertainty you had felt before was beginning to fade. You understood, in a way you hadn't before, that the future was not some distant, unchangeable thing. It was something you could shape. You could weave the threads of destiny one choice at a time. And in doing so, you could create a new path, a new future, for yourself and for those around you. The forest seemed to grow quieter, the only sound now the soft rustle of the wind in the trees. You felt a strange sense of calm wash over you, as though the very earth beneath your feet was grounding you, steadying you for what was to come. The watcher's gaze softened, and for a moment she seemed almost human. "You are ready," she said softly. "You have seen the web. You have felt the weight of it, and now you must act. But remember, we are always here, watching, waiting. You are never alone in this." As her words faded, a feeling of understanding blossomed within you. You were not just a player in this vast game of fate. You were a weaver, a creator. You could shape the future, but only if you had the wisdom to use your power with care. You understood the stakes now. The balance of the web was fragile, and the smallest pull of a thread could have untold consequences. You had to tread carefully, choosing your steps with the utmost caution. But you also knew something else, something deeper. The threads you controlled were not just about the future. They were about the present. You didn't have to shape the world all at once. You could start small. You could begin with the people you knew, with the places you loved. You could touch the threads of your own life, weaving them in ways that brought meaning, that brought change. The Watchers were right. You were ready. And the future, whatever it held, was yours to weave. The forest around you remained still, as if caught in the quiet anticipation of the moment. The fire before you had burned down to glowing embers, its light flickering weakly in the growing darkness. The wind, once gentle, had stilled, leaving only the soft rustle of the leaves high above, the occasional creak of an ancient tree stretching toward the heavens. You could feel it deep in your bones, the weight of the decision you had made, the power that was now yours. You were a weaver, and with that title came the knowledge that you had the ability to influence the future. The threads of fate that stretched across the universe, weaving lives, destinies, and entire worlds together, were now within your reach. But with that power came an understanding that had settled into your heart, a deep, irrevocable truth. The balance was fragile. The Watchers had given you their wisdom, their caution. The weight of every choice, no matter how small, was enormous. And now the time had come to act. The question that hung in the air was no longer about if you should weave the threads, but how. Every choice you made would ripple through the fabric of existence, shifting the very world around you. How could you possibly choose? But as the firelight flickered, casting fleeting shadows across the clearing, you realized that there was no more time for hesitation. The world was not waiting for you to decide. It was already changing. And you, as a weaver, were the one who would decide which threads to pull, which paths to guide, which choices to make. You stood and took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill your lungs. It was time. The first pull was always the hardest, the choice that would set everything into motion. But you couldn't remain stagnant forever. The web would move with or without you, and the longer you hesitated, the more uncertain the future would become. The Watchers had told you to start small, to choose a thread that called to you. But as your gaze swept the clearing, your eyes drawn to the faint glow of the fire's dying embers, you felt something stir within you. There was something here, something close. A thread you could touch. A path that could be shaped, guided, altered. And it wasn't the grand destiny of the world that called to you now. It was something more immediate, something more personal. You thought of the people you had left behind, the life you had once known, the paths you had walked before crossing the threshold of the lodge. You could feel the pull of that world still, its threads winding around you like invisible chains. The choices you had made had led you here, but the people you cared about, what had become of them? What paths had they taken in your absence? Your mind was racing now, but there was clarity within the storm. You had always wondered, had always felt, that your fate was tied to something beyond the ordinary. The forest had shown you the nature of fate itself, the interwoven paths of all lives stretching infinitely into the future. But the future, as you had seen, was not set in stone. You were part of that web now, and it was your hands that would pull the threads, at least for a time. The forest itself, the very world you had returned to, felt alive with the choices you could make. The stillness around you was not absence, it was potential. 1,000 possibilities unfurled before your mind's eye. The threads were waiting, and you would choose where to guide them. It was then that you felt it, a subtle pull, a whisper of a thread, faint but undeniable, stretching from somewhere just beyond your reach. You focused, attuning your senses to it, feeling its pulse like a heartbeat, fragile yet vital. It was a familiar thread, one that was deeply connected to you, yet distant, frayed at the edges. It was a thread tied to someone you knew. The memory flooded back in an instant. A face, a name, a shared history. A person from your past, someone whose fate had been intertwined with yours long before you had ever set foot in the forest, long before you had crossed the threshold and become a weaver. You had parted ways with this person long ago, and the paths you had once shared had diverged into separate worlds, separate lives. But now, standing here in the quiet of the forest, their thread was calling to you, faint but insistent. The decision seemed simple in that moment. You could pull this thread, this small, familiar path, and see where it led. You could influence their fate, guide them in ways you could not have imagined before. Perhaps you thought it could be as simple as ensuring that they were safe, that their life was not marred by the same darkness that had once consumed yours. You could change the course of their journey just as you had changed yours. You could alter their future, ensure they were kept safe from the dangers that lurked in the shadows of fate. But as the weight of the decision settled in your chest, another thought tugged at you. Was it truly your place to guide their path? The web of fate was delicate. By pulling this thread, you could change their life, but you could also change everything around them. Their choices, their struggles, their victories, and their defeats. Every decision you made now would ripple out across the web, creating consequences that would stretch far beyond their world, beyond the lives you could see. What would it cost? Was this a price you were willing to pay? The Watcher's voice echoed in your mind. Remember, we are all part of the web. The balance must be maintained. The threads must not be pulled too tightly. The warning was clear. No choice was ever simple. Even a small change could lead to unexpected consequences. You were no longer the naive person you had once been, standing at the crossroads of fate. You were a weaver now, with the power to shift the very fabric of existence. But that power was not without its risks. Your fingers trembled slightly as you reached out toward the thread. You could feel the subtle warmth of it, the pull of destiny that connected you to the person whose fate now lay in your hands. It was a delicate thing, fragile in its intensity. It was not a forceful tug, but a gentle, insistent pull, as though the thread itself were asking to be touched, asking to be guided. In the silence of the night, the weight of your decision grew heavier. Was this the moment you were meant to act? Was this the thread you were meant to weave? Could you live with the consequences, knowing that even the smallest change in their life could reverberate through the web in ways you could never fully understand? You took another breath, steadying yourself. You would choose this path. Your fingers brushed the thread, and in that moment you felt the entire world shudder. The forest, the clearing, the very air around you seemed to hold its breath as the delicate pull of fate was initiated. You could feel the thread stretching, bending, the fabric of reality itself shifting as you made the first choice of your journey as a weaver. The thread was not something you controlled, it was something you guided. With your touch, it began to shimmer, to glow faintly with a light of its own. You could feel the other person, distant but now linked to you in a way they could never understand. The path ahead of them was shifting, ever so slightly, the faintest of changes setting a new course in motion. But as you made the pull, the web began to vibrate, subtly as though it were alive, aware of the shift you had just set in motion. The world around you seemed to hum with the sound of it, the fabric of existence itself responding to your first touch. And then, almost imperceptibly, you felt it, another thread, another pull, this time from a different place, a different life. It was more distant than the first, but it too was a part of the web. And you could feel it, like the tug of an invisible hand, waiting for your attention. The web was vast, and once you began, you could not stop. The moment your fingers brushed the thread, the world seemed to exhale. The wind stirred ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the shift in the fabric of reality. The night, once still and silent, seemed to hum with energy, the faintest reverberations of the thread you had pulled sending ripples through the air around you. The fire's embers flickered once more, casting shadows that stretched long and twisted in the night. You felt the weight of the change in the air, subtle but undeniable. The world, in its infinite complexity, had just shifted, as though you had nudged it off its axis by a single fraction of a degree. The path of the person you had guided, the person whose fate you had altered, was now slightly different from what it had been just moments before. You couldn't see the full scope of the change yet, but you could feel it in your bones. Something had begun. The thread was pulled, and now the web would begin to respond. The clearing felt quieter now, the stillness more pronounced as the night seemed to settle deeper into itself. The Watcher, the woman who had guided you into this world of weavers, was silent, watching you with those ancient, knowing eyes. Her gaze was steady, but there was an unreadable quality to it, as though she were waiting for you to understand something you hadn't yet fully grasped. You felt the weight of her scrutiny, but you did not flinch. This was your path now, the weaver's path. There was no turning back. And yet, you were keenly aware that this was only the beginning, the first of many choices you would have to make. The thread you had pulled was only one among countless others that stretched across the web, waiting for your attention, your touch. Each one was a potential change, a moment that could ripple across the fabric of existence, altering the course of countless lives. Do you feel it? The Watcher's voice cut through the stillness, soft yet piercing. She stepped closer to you, her movements fluid, almost otherworldly. The threads you pull, the paths you choose to guide, they do not just affect those directly touched by your actions. The web is a delicate balance, and every decision you make can create waves that ripple outward. You have altered the future of one life tonight. But know this, the ripples from that one choice will extend far beyond what you can see. Her words were like a spark to kindling. You could feel it then, the faintest hum of something larger than yourself, something deeper within the fabric of reality itself. The thread you had pulled wasn't just a simple alteration. No, it was a key, unlocking paths you could not yet see, opening doors in the web that had previously remained closed. The weight of that realization hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick with the promise of change. You didn't respond immediately, but instead closed your eyes for a moment, feeling the pull of the web around you. The thread you had chosen was still alive within you, the faintest tug on your heart, guiding your thoughts toward the person whose path had just been altered. You could feel them, though you had no way of knowing where they were, what they were doing, or even who they had become. But you felt them nonetheless. They were now part of the vast, interconnected web you had touched. For a long moment you simply felt the faint pull of the world, the pulse of fate, the infinite connections between lives that had once seemed so distant, so separate, now felt within your reach. You understood, perhaps for the first time, the enormity of what you had just done. This was not a small thing. Each thread you touched would send ripples through time, space, and fate, shifting the lives of not only those you intended to help but those who were connected to them, whether they knew it or not. And yet, as you stood there in the clearing, the sound of the night around you growing louder with each passing second, you couldn't help but feel something more. It was a strange, inexplicable feeling. A sense that the world as you had known it was already starting to change in ways that could not be undone. The Watcher's voice brought you back from your thoughts. "Do not take the weight of this power lightly," she said, her voice carrying the gravity of centuries of wisdom. "You are a weaver, but the web is not yours to control. The choices you make must be tempered with wisdom, with foresight, for every path you shape creates a multitude of new paths. Every thread you pull changes the course of many lives, and you must learn to understand the consequences of your actions." You nodded slowly, understanding her words, yet feeling an intense desire to reach out, to make more changes, to alter the threads you could see stretching before you. You felt the pull of countless paths, choices you could make, people you could save, destinies you could rewrite. The web was vast, and every moment spent in hesitation was a moment wasted. You could see it now more clearly than before. The world was alive with possibilities. But something else was there too, a faint, unsettling presence that lingered in the air. It was as though the very web itself were watching you now, aware of your presence, aware of your actions. There was something ancient, something beyond even the Watchers, that seemed to pulse through the fabric of reality, waiting for you to make the next move. You could feel it, a cold, unseen hand on the threads. A reminder that the web, in all its complexity, was not entirely benevolent. There were forces, dark forces, that existed within the web, forces that sought to manipulate the threads to their own ends. And as a weaver, you were now vulnerable to those forces. You had seen glimpses of them before, in the whispers of the forest, in the flickering shadows of the lodge. They were there, in the background, waiting for the right moment to pull at the threads themselves. The weight of this knowledge settled in your chest like a stone. The path ahead was not just a path of creation, it was also a path of danger. There were forces in the web that you could not control, and they were watching, waiting for you to make a misstep. What had once seemed like an opportunity to reshape the future now seemed like a fragile thread, one that could snap at any moment, unraveling everything you had worked to build. But there was no turning back now. The Watcher stood before you, her eyes never leaving yours. "There is another choice for you now," she said, her voice low and measured. "You have altered the future of one life, but there are many threads still waiting for your touch. The question you must now answer is this. Do you continue to guide the lives of others, or do you turn your attention to the larger threads, the ones that lie beyond your immediate reach? The web is vast, and your power is growing. You must decide where to focus it." Her words lingered in the air like smoke, fading but still present, the echoes of her question resonating deep within you. The future was now yours to shape. But where would you begin? Would you continue to focus on the threads closest to you, the ones you could see and feel? Or would you venture further into the unknown, seeking to unravel the mysteries of the web's greater design? As you stood there in the heart of the forest, the firelight now nothing more than a faint glow in the distance, you understood that your journey was only just beginning. The web was vast, and every choice you made would change everything. But you were no longer alone in this task. You were part of something far greater than yourself, something that spanned across time, across worlds. The question now was not if you would change the course of destiny, but how you would do it. The web had begun to respond. The first pull had set everything in motion. The air around you crackled with energy, almost like static electricity, as though the very fabric of the world was humming in response to your actions. The Watcher remained silent, watching with a steady gaze, but you could feel her attention, sharp, unwavering, waiting for you to make the next choice. The ripples of the first thread you pulled were still reverberating, but as they spread, you felt something else. Something darker, something disconcerting stirring within the web. The threads of fate weren't as simple as you had once thought. They weren't just paths that could be gently tugged, altered, and guided. They were alive, and sometimes they resisted. For a moment, you stood there in the center of the clearing, the quiet rustle of the trees filling your ears. The firelight flickered in the distance, its warmth almost distant now, as if it were not just physical distance but emotional distance too. Your heartbeat was steady, but your thoughts were racing, caught in the currents of the web you had just begun to unravel. You could feel it just beneath the surface of everything. The threads were not always cooperative. Some pulled back when you tried to guide them, others twisted and snapped in ways you couldn't predict. The web itself seemed to have a will of its own, and it wasn't always aligned with your intentions. The question was no longer about whether you could change the future, but whether you could control it. You closed your eyes for a moment, trying to clear your mind, focusing on the delicate pulse of the web that now thrummed in your veins. Every thread you touched, every life you altered seemed to vibrate through your entire being. It was as though you had become part of the web, woven into its design, part of something much larger than yourself. You could hear the echoes of every decision, every choice, stretching out across the threads like a chorus of distant voices, all speaking in unison or perhaps in discord. And then, just as the hum of the web seemed to reach a crescendo, you felt it. A disruption. It was subtle at first, just the faintest tremor, like a spider's thread snapping somewhere far in the distance. But the more you focused on it, the more you realized something had shifted. The web wasn't just responding to your actions, it was reacting to you, and not in the way you had expected. The path you had begun to walk, the influence you had started to wield, it wasn't simply a matter of guiding the threads anymore. The web itself was beginning to fight back. The watcher, sensing the shift, stepped closer to you, her dark cloak sweeping the forest floor as she moved. The quiet intensity in her gaze never wavered, but there was something else there now, a flicker of concern. "The threads are shifting," she said, her voice low but filled with weight. "They are not just passive lines of fate. They are alive like you and I, and they have their own will. You are not the only one who can pull at them. There are forces in the web that you do not fully understand. Forces that seek to maintain the balance, forces that fight against change." Her words hung in the air, as heavy as the night itself. Forces in the web? What forces? For a moment you couldn't speak. The weight of the realization settled over you like a stone, pressing down on your chest. The web wasn't just a collection of threads to be woven at will. It was a living organism, a dynamic, ever-changing entity that responded to those who pulled its threads, and not always in predictable ways. The more you tried to influence it, the more it seemed to push back. It was as though the web had a deep, ancient instinct to protect itself, to preserve its own integrity, even at the cost of your intentions. "You must learn to listen to the web," the watcher continued, her voice steady but layered with something deeper. "Not all threads are meant to be pulled. Some are meant to stay in place, others meant to unravel on their own. Your choices will have consequences beyond what you can see, and the more you push against the web, the more it will push back." Her gaze deepened, and she seemed to look right through you, her eyes narrowing with the weight of her words. "You are not the first to come to the web to think they could shape it. But every weaver who has come before you has learned, the web cannot be bent to will alone." A sudden, sharp awareness washed over you, a realization that burned through the fog of uncertainty. This wasn't just about altering a future or guiding a path. The web wasn't something that could be easily tamed or controlled. It was a force of nature, something that was. You could guide it, yes, but you could not completely dominate it. The ripple of tension in the air around you deepened as you began to understand the true stakes of the web. Every time you made a choice, every time you pulled at a thread, you were changing the very fabric of existence. The future, the lives of countless people, the balance of the web itself. Everything was interwoven, delicate, fragile. And now you could feel the weight of the forces that guarded the web. Forces that sought to preserve the balance, to prevent the chaos that came from unchecked manipulation. There were those who would do anything to stop you from altering the web too much. The quiet hum of the forest seemed to grow louder in your ears, the sound of the night more oppressive, as though the trees themselves were closing in around you. The threads stretched out before you, brighter now, more vibrant, but also darker, tinged with shadows that you hadn't noticed before. It was as though the very air was thick with possibility and danger. The watcher spoke again, her voice still calm, but with an edge of something urgent. "There are dangers in the web, things you cannot see. Things that may not want you to pull on certain threads. There are forces that protect the web, guardians of the balance. If you continue to manipulate the web without understanding its full power, those forces will awaken, and you will be hunted." The weight of her words sank in, and you felt the threads around you shift again, a stronger tug this time, as if something unseen had noticed you, something ancient and powerful. You felt the web stir, the very atmosphere around you vibrating with its potential. And it wasn't just the people you could influence, it was the forces that lived within the fabric of reality itself. The guardians. the unknown entities that watched over the threads. You turned your gaze toward the watcher, but her expression was unreadable. The distance between you seemed to widen, as though the very air between you had thickened. Guardians, you repeated softly, trying to wrap your mind around the idea. Are they the ones who've been interfering with my choices? The watcher nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing in the low light. They are the forces that govern the balance of the web. They ensure that no one weaves too much or pulls too tightly. And when they sense a shift, they will come for you. They will stop you from unraveling what they believe is meant to remain intact. A chill ran down your spine. You had thought the web was something you could mold, shape, and guide. But now you realized you were only a player in a much larger game, a game with forces far beyond your understanding. Forces that protected the delicate equilibrium of reality itself. The Guardians, you began, but the words faltered on your lips. What do I do now? The watcher's gaze softened for a moment, though her eyes still held the weight of centuries of wisdom. She stepped closer to you, her voice quieter now, as though speaking of something deeply personal. You must be careful, she said, her words carrying an urgency you had not heard before. The web is not something to be controlled. It is something to be respected. You will feel their presence soon, the Guardians. And when you do, you will know that you are being watched, that you are being tested. You stood there, the weight of her words sinking in, your mind racing. You had pulled at one thread, and now the web was fighting back. There was no more room for uncertainty. You had to decide whether to press forward, to continue altering the threads, or whether to tread carefully to respect the web's natural flow. The air around you thickened as the thread stretched farther into the unknown, beckoning you to act once more. The weight of the watcher's words hung in the air, a deep, palpable silence settling over the forest. The once quiet, unbroken hum of the web had become a low thrum, almost like the beat of a distant drum, growing louder with each passing moment. The threads you had touched felt taut beneath your fingertips, as if they were resisting your influence, their edges trembling with a force beyond your control. There was a subtle pull now, not from the path you had chosen, but from something deeper, something older, a force that was not so easily manipulated. It was a feeling like being caught in a storm you could neither outrun nor escape. The web was pushing back, and you had just begun to feel its power. You turned to the watcher, seeking guidance, but she was watching you with a certain gravity in her gaze that made you hesitate. Her expression was not one of reassurance, but of acknowledgement. She had seen this before, you realized. She knew the dangers that lurked within the fabric of fate, knew what it meant to touch the threads and awaken something ancient and dangerous. The Guardians will not wait, she said softly, her voice tinged with a certain sadness. They will come for you, and they will come swiftly. If you continue to pull on the threads without understanding the full scope of their influence, you will draw their attention. And they are not merciful. Her words were like a cold wind sweeping through your mind, pushing you to confront something you had not fully understood before. The web was not just an interconnected series of threads, it was alive, a living system, and there were those who watched over it, ensuring that its delicate balance remained undisturbed. The Guardians were not just protectors. They were enforcers, relentless and powerful, and they would not hesitate to intervene if they sensed that the web was being manipulated too recklessly. They were not forces you could bargain with. They were the essence of the web's will, unyielding and ancient. The forest around you felt heavy with this newfound knowledge. The trees stood silent, towering over you as the wind began to stir once again, but this time it felt different. The air had become thick with tension, as though the very atmosphere were charged with an impending storm. The trees whispered, their branches creaking in the night wind, as though they too were warning you. The presence of the web, of its guardians, was growing, stretching across the forest, weaving into the very ground beneath your feet. You could no longer deny it. The web was watching you. Do you think you can change the world without consequence? The watcher's voice broke through the haze of your thoughts. It wasn't harsh, but it was firm, heavy with the knowledge of countless weavers who had come before you. The threads are not yours to break or bend without regard. You must understand their purpose before you act. You cannot simply pull and weave at will. The Guardians are watching, and they will stop you if you push too far. The warning was clear. Every thread you manipulated, every choice you made, created ripples that stretched across the fabric of existence. Those ripples would disturb not only the lives of those directly connected to the threads, but also the greater flow of the web itself. And the Guardians, ancient and untouchable, were the ones who ensured that those ripples didn't become waves that would tear apart the very essence of the universe. But you couldn't turn back now. The threads had already been pulled. The web had already begun to shift. The path had been set in motion, and every hesitation, Every moment of uncertainty would only increase the weight of your decision. You had felt the pull, the tremor of change when you tugged at that first thread. And now you felt the call of more. The air grew colder as the shadows around you deepened. The forest, which had once seemed alive with the whispers of the web, had now become eerily silent. The watcher, sensing your hesitation, stepped closer to you, her eyes never leaving yours. There was something in her gaze, something both warning and understanding. She had walked this path before, and she could see the uncertainty in your eyes, the hesitation that clung to you like a shroud. You felt it, haven't you? She asked softly. The disturbance, the reaction of the web to your actions. It is not just the threads you alter. It is the fabric itself. The web does not forgive recklessness. It does not tolerate those who pull too hard, too fast. You swallowed, the weight of her words sinking deeper into your chest. The guardians were not just watching you, they were sensing your every movement, every choice, every action. They could feel the pull of the threads, the way you were altering their paths. And the deeper you went, the more they would notice. You were not just a player in this game. You were becoming a force within it, a weaver whose influence could ripple outward and change the very foundation of reality itself. And the guardians were not the only ones watching. You felt a cold prickle on the back of your neck, the sensation of being observed by something else, something darker. The shadows at the edge of your vision seemed to shift, swirling and twisting in unnatural ways as though they were alive. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it, a presence that was not part of the natural world. Something that had always been there, lying just beyond the edges of your awareness. The web wasn't just watched over by the guardians. It was watched over by something older, something that thrived in the dark, in the cracks between the threads. Something that fed on change. You had seen the ripples of this force before, but now they felt much closer, sharper. There was no mistaking it now. Something was stirring in the web, something ancient and dangerous. The watcher seemed to sense it too, for her expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed, and she glanced over her shoulder, her gaze scanning the edges of the clearing. Her lips parted slightly as if she were about to speak, but she closed her mouth again, the weight of her silence speaking volumes. The web is not a simple place, she said after a long pause, her voice now tinged with a rare uncertainty. You think you can control it. You think you can shape it. But there are forces at work here that cannot be understood by any weaver. They are ancient and beyond the comprehension of mortal minds. And they are patient. Her words fell like stones into the still air. The very atmosphere around you seemed to shift, as though the world was holding its breath. You felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on you, the forces in the web that were still hidden from your view, their intentions as murky as the shadows that crept just outside your vision. You had only begun to scratch the surface, only begun to feel the weight of the choices you were making. But now there was a new understanding, a new awareness within you. The guardians were not the only force to be reckoned with. There were deeper, darker entities within the web, entities that existed in the cracks between the threads, in the shadows where the light of understanding could not reach. They were not bound by the same rules as the weavers. They had no interest in the balance of the web, only in the change it could bring. And as you stood there, feeling the weight of their presence, you realized something else. You had awakened something. The web was a vast, complex entity, and by manipulating it, by pulling on the threads, you had not just disturbed the lives of those directly connected to you. You had disturbed something much larger, something that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The watcher took a slow step back, her eyes never leaving yours. You are on the precipice, she said softly. The path you walk now will shape not just your future, but the fate of the web itself. You must choose and choose wisely. If you continue, the forces watching you will reveal themselves. And when they do, there may be no turning back. Her words echoed in your mind, the gravity of them settling deep in your bones. You had already made a choice, a small change, but a change nonetheless. But now the stakes were higher. The threads were pulling tighter, the forces of the web awakening. You could feel it, they could feel it. The question now was not just about what you would do next, but whether you were prepared to face the consequences of your actions. The web was alive and it was watching. The guardians were the least of your concerns now. The watcher's words still echoed in your mind as you stood there, caught between the weight of your choices and the unknown forces that now stirred in the fabric of reality. The air around you had shifted once again, the once familiar sounds of the forest now muted, as if the very world was holding its breath, waiting for your next decision. The fire, now little more than a dying ember, flickered weakly, casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing. The trees, towering and ancient, stood like silent sentinels, their branches creaking in the night wind, a subtle reminder of how little you truly understood about the world around you. The watcher's gaze never wavered, her eyes still locked onto yours, but there was something different now, something more guarded, more cautious. You could feel it in the subtle shift of her posture, in the way her cloak billowed around her as she took a step back, as though giving you space to breathe, yet watching every move you made. Her warning had been clear. The web was not just a tapestry to be woven at will. It was a force of nature, alive with its own will, its own guardians, and its own shadows. You had disturbed something ancient, something far older than even the Watchers. And now, the question that hung between you was no longer about how you would shape the future. It was about whether you would be able to control the forces you had awakened. For a long moment, you stood in silence, your mind racing, your heart pounding in your chest. The threads of fate, which had once seemed so malleable, now felt more like chains, binding you to a destiny you were beginning to realize you couldn't escape. Every choice you made rippled through the web, and those ripples were beginning to carry consequences that were far beyond what you had anticipated. The Guardians were not just watching, they were waiting, and you could feel their presence just beyond the edges of your perception, as though they were lurking in the shadows of the web, just out of sight, but always aware of your every move. You could feel the pull of the dark forces that lay hidden within the web. It was not the subtle, gentle tug of the threads you had been guided by, but something far more insistent, far more insidious. The dark currents of the web were stirring, reaching out to you like cold, unseen hands, beckoning you deeper into the unknown. You had touched the first thread, and now the web was pulling you in, its tendrils curling around your thoughts, urging you to take another step, to weave once more. But as you felt the pull, there was a sharp, instinctive awareness that stopped you, a realization that grew louder in your mind with each passing second. Whatever lay beyond the boundaries of the web was not something you could control, not without consequence. The darkness that had once seemed like a distant, obscure force was now pressing in around you, suffocating the very air you breathed. You could feel it, thick and oppressive, lurking just beyond the veil of your consciousness. You had not just altered the threads of fate, you had disturbed something. And that something was watching you, waiting for its moment to strike. The Watcher, sensing the shift in your awareness, took a step forward. Her eyes locked onto yours, her expression now intense with urgency. "The forces you have awakened will not wait forever," she said, her voice low and laced with a tension that you had not heard before. "They will find you, and when they do, they will not be merciful. You must understand this. The web does not take kindly to those who tread too far into its depths." Her words were heavy, her warning clear. You were no longer just a weaver. You were something else now, something that had stirred the very foundations of the web, a presence that could no longer be ignored. The Guardians would come for you, of that much you were certain. But so too would the darker forces, the ones that lived in the gaps between the threads, the ones who thrived on the chaos of change. You could feel their presence now, closer than ever. It was a subtle sensation, a coldness that crept into your bones, a creeping awareness that made your skin prickle. It was as though the very air around you had thickened, become heavier, as though something else was pulling at the threads. And that something was not kind. It was not the delicate, calculated weaving of fate that you had learned to manipulate. It was something darker, something that reveled in the unraveling of the web. The Watcher's voice broke through your thoughts once more. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice tight with the same realization that was slowly taking root in your mind. "The darkness between the threads. It is not just the Guardians you must fear. There are forces that dwell in the cracks. They are ancient, older than even the Watchers, and they feed on the chaos of the web." The words hit you like a blow to the chest. You had known that the web was not a simple thing, that it was fraught with dangers beyond your understanding. But you had never fully grasped the depth of the darkness that lurked just out of sight. You had pulled the first thread, and now that darkness was beginning to notice you. The forest around you seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching unnaturally long, as if the very world were distorting around you. The wind, which had been gentle moments before, now howled through the trees with a sharpness that made your teeth ache. The temperature dropped, the air turning cold and sharp, biting at your skin. It was as though the forest itself had begun to withdraw from you, pulling back in fear, as though it were aware of the danger that had been stirred. You turned to the Watcher, but she was no longer the calm, composed figure she had been before. Her eyes were wide, alert, her posture tense. She looked over her shoulder, scanning the edges of the clearing, as though she too could feel the weight of something watching. "They are here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've disturbed something that should not be disturbed, and now they will come. You must make a choice. A choice." The very word seemed to hang in the air like a weight. The darkness was closing in, its presence now suffocating, thick with malice. You could feel it crawling beneath your skin, creeping into your thoughts. And you knew without a doubt that you had only one option left. You could run. But where would you go? The web was vast. There was nowhere to hide. The forces within the web would find you wherever you went. The guardians might have been watching you from the shadows, but they were not the only ones who could feel the ripples of fate you had caused. The other forces, the ones who lived in the cracks between the threads, were far more dangerous. They were ancient, they were primal, and they were hungry. And so, there was only one choice that remained. You would stand your ground. Fight, the Watcher said softly, but her tone was not one of encouragement, it was one of grim resolve. You have awoken them, and now you must face the consequences. But know this, the web is not on your side. You are no longer just a weaver. You are part of the fabric itself, and once you begin to unravel the threads, you cannot stop. The weight of her words sank in. This was it. You were no longer a mere observer, manipulating the threads of fate. You had become part of the web, and now the web itself was fighting back. The darkness was closing in. There was no time left for hesitation. The Watcher stepped back, her figure fading into the shadows, leaving you alone in the clearing. But you could still feel her presence, the knowledge that she was watching, waiting for you to make your move. And in that moment, you realized something profound. You were not alone in this fight. The forces you had awakened might be ancient, but so too was your power. The threads were still yours to weave, still yours to control. But the question was, would you be able to control them long enough to survive the coming storm? You could feel the pull of the dark forces now, stronger than ever. The web was alive, and it was watching you. The time for hesitation was over. The web had begun to unravel, and you had to decide whether to fight or to fade into the darkness. The world around you had changed. The web that once felt like a collection of threads, pliable and malleable, now seemed vast and impenetrable. It stretched endlessly beyond what you could see, a labyrinth of paths that reached into every corner of existence, twisting and turning with the intricate design of fate itself. But the more you reached into it, the more you realized that the web was not just something you could shape with ease. It was alive, sentient, and older than time itself. And now it was fighting back. You could feel the dark forces closing in, their presence like a weight pressing down on your chest, suffocating the very air around you. The whispers from the shadows were growing louder, the subtle pull of the threads now more pronounced, tugging at your soul with an insistent, insidious energy. The darkness between the threads, the forces that thrived on the unraveling of fate, were not content to merely watch, they were hunting. And you, the weaver, were the prey. The trees around you creaked in the wind, the branches bending and swaying, as though the forest itself were drawing back in fear. The clearing had become a place of tension, where the very atmosphere seemed to thrum with the hum of unseen forces. The fire had long since died down to a smoldering pile of ash, the dying embers casting faint glows that flickered like the last breaths of a dying flame. The air was cold now, unnaturally so, and every movement you made felt as if it were being scrutinized by 1,000 unseen eyes. You stood alone in the center of the clearing, the Watcher's absence heavy on your mind. She had warned you of the dangers that lay in the web, the forces that could never be fully understood, the entities that were beyond your control. But her warning had not been enough to stop you. The threads you had pulled were now too far unraveled, and the web was beginning to fray, sending ripples through the very fabric of existence. The ground beneath your feet trembled as though something ancient was awakening. The shadows, once distant and abstract, were now becoming tangible, real. The darkness between the threads was growing stronger, its pull more insistent. You could feel it now, the gnawing sensation at the edges of your thoughts, the cold presence that seemed to be drawing you in slowly but surely. It was the very essence of chaos, the opposite of the delicate balance the web had once maintained. The darkness fed on change, on the unraveling of order, and now it was hungry. For a moment you thought you heard a whisper, a voice, faint and distant, but unmistakable. It came from the shadows, from the very edges of the forest. You strained to listen, but the words were too faint, too distorted to understand. Still, the voice was there, and it was calling to you, drawing you into the darkness. You stepped back, your mind racing. The forest had gone quiet, the distant rustling of the trees now replaced by a suffocating silence. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping toward you like tendrils of smoke. It was as though the very air had thickened, each breath you took feeling more labored than the last. The Watcher's words echoed in your mind. The forces that dwell in the cracks between the threads are not merciful. They will come for you, and they will not stop until they've unraveled everything you've worked to weave. You could feel their presence now, closer than ever, a suffocating weight pressing down on you from all sides. The darkness was not just watching, it was alive and it was moving. The ground beneath you quaked again, this time stronger, more insistent. You looked down, and for the briefest moment, you thought you saw something. A flicker of movement beneath the soil, as though something ancient were stirring beneath the earth. It was a feeling you could not shake, a deep, primal sense of unease that sank into your bones. The forest, the trees, the very ground beneath your feet, it was all part of the web, and it was starting to unravel. The wind picked up once more, but this time it was not the gentle breeze you had felt before. It was sharp, cutting through the clearing like a knife, its howl rising in intensity. The trees began to bend and sway, their leaves rustling in a frantic, unnatural rhythm, as though they were reacting to the pull of the darkness. The very fabric of the web was starting to tremble, as if it were shaking off the disturbance you had caused. You took a deep breath, your mind racing with the implications of your actions. The threads you had pulled had set something in motion, something that was now beyond your control. The guardians, the forces that watched over the web, they were not enough to keep the balance. You had disturbed something much darker, a force that fed on the unraveling of fate, a force that existed in the cracks between the threads, in the spaces between moments, in the darkness that had always been there, just beyond the reach of the light. The shadows thickened, swirling around you like a vortex, growing stronger with each passing second. You felt the air grow colder still, the temperature dropping to an unbearable chill, the very breath in your lungs turning to ice. The darkness was pulling at you now, its grip tightening around your chest like a vice. And then you saw it, something moving in the shadows, something shifting. It was a figure, tall and indistinct, its form twisted and unnatural. It seemed to shift and ripple, as though it were made of the very darkness itself, a presence that was both there and not there, a shadow that moved with an eerie fluidity. You could feel its eyes on you, although you could not see them. But you knew it was watching you. You could hear the whispers again, clearer now, though still indecipherable. They came from every direction, a cacophony of voices speaking in tongues you could not understand. They echoed through the trees, reverberated in the very air around you, a sound that was both maddening and hypnotic. The darkness was growing, wrapping itself around you like a tightening noose, and you knew that this was the moment you had been warned about. The force was closing in. You had pulled at the web, and now you were about to face the consequences of your actions. The forces that had been lying in wait, the forces that thrived in the spaces between the threads, were no longer content to watch. They were coming. You took a step back, your heart racing. The Watcher had warned you that the darkness would reveal itself, but you had not been prepared for this. You had not understood just how far-reaching the consequences of your actions would be. The web was no longer something you could control. It had taken on a life of its own, and now the consequences of your choices were becoming painfully clear. The figure in the shadows shifted again, and this time it moved closer, its presence growing stronger with each step it took. You could feel the pull of its power, the weight of its intent, and you knew this was no mere shadow. You reached for the threads, the ones you had manipulated, hoping that somehow you could pull them back, stitch them together, undo the damage you had caused. But it was too late. The threads were no longer in your control. They were unraveling faster than you could comprehend, each strand of fate pulling apart with a force that was beyond your ability to restrain. The figure in the darkness moved once more, and this time, you could hear it clearly, the sound of something ripping. The fabric of reality, the web you had touched so carelessly, was beginning to tear. It was happening. The unraveling had begun. The figure in the shadows loomed ever closer, its form no longer a mere silhouette but something more, something far darker and more powerful than anything you had ever imagined. Its presence seemed to distort the very fabric of the clearing, warping the trees, the ground, the air itself, as if reality itself was bending and twisting under the weight of its existence. The whispers around you grew louder, more frantic, a cacophony of voices, all tangled together, indistinguishable from one another, yet all filled with a shared hunger, a hunger for the unraveling that was happening before your very eyes. You could feel the air grow colder, the temperature plummeting as if the life had been sucked out of the world around you. Each breath you took seemed to freeze in your lungs, every movement slowed by the thick, oppressive weight of the darkness surrounding you. The web, the very thing you had manipulated so carelessly, was beginning to come apart at the seams, and you could feel the threads slipping through your fingers, beyond your control, beyond your comprehension. The figure stepped forward, its movement fluid and unnatural, as though it were made of smoke, shifting and twisting in a way that defied all logic. It was as though it existed in multiple places at once, its form rippling like the surface of water disturbed by an unseen hand. You could feel its eyes on you, though you couldn't see them. You could feel the intent in its gaze, a cold, ancient awareness that seemed to pierce straight through you, reading you, understanding you, judging you. The whispers were louder now, pressing in on all sides. It was speaking to you, not in words but in sensations and emotions. You could feel its contempt, its cold indifference, its hunger. It was as though it had always been here, waiting in the darkness, waiting for someone to disturb the delicate balance of the web, to pull at the threads, to awaken something that should have remained forgotten. And now you were the one who had awoken it. For the briefest moment, you felt a flicker of doubt, a moment where you wondered if there was any hope left, any way to undo what had been done. But that moment passed, replaced by something far deeper, the realization that there was no turning back. You had entered this place, this abyss, and now you would have to face the consequences of your actions. The figure loomed just a few paces away, its presence overwhelming, as though it were the very embodiment of the darkness that lay between the threads of fate. You could feel the air crackle with its power, the very ground beneath your feet trembling in its wake. The whispers, once distant, now filled your mind completely, their meanings no longer hidden behind the veil of incomprehensibility. You could hear the distinct words now, and they chilled you to your very core. You have disturbed the balance. The voice was not one, but many, a chorus of voices speaking in unison. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was ancient, older than the trees that surrounded you, older than the forest itself, older than the web that had once been your domain. You have awoken us, the voices continued, and now you will face the consequences of your actions. You tried to move, but your limbs felt heavy, as though the very air had become a weight, a barrier between you and the world you once knew. Your mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to escape this moment, but it was as if the darkness itself had sealed you in, trapping you in its cold, unrelenting grasp. There was no escape. The figure stepped closer still, and now you could see its form more clearly, its shape a shifting mass of darkness, like the smoke of a dying fire, with tendrils that reached out like fingers of shadow. It was not truly humanoid, it was something else, something that existed in the spaces between, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface of the web. Its presence distorted the very air around it, bending the world itself in ways that you couldn't comprehend. It was the darkness between the threads, and now it had come for you. The darkness reached out with its tendrils, and you could feel them brushing against your skin, cold and sharp, like the touch of ice. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was something deeper, something that sank into your soul, that twisted and churned within you, gnawing at your very essence. The tendrils wrapped around your mind, and you felt the web itself begin to tremble again, as though it were reacting to this intrusion, this disturbance, this force that had never been meant to emerge. You will not escape, the voices said, not until the web is undone. There was no warning, no moment of hesitation. The darkness surged, and with it, the web began to tear. You felt it, like a jagged crack in the world itself. The very threads you had so carefully pulled at were snapping, unraveling, one by one, the fabric of reality itself coming undone at the seams. The air around you trembled, the trees groaning in protest as the world itself seemed to warp and bend. The shadows grew thicker, darker, as if they were consuming the light itself, drawing it into the depths of the web, into the abyss. You could feel it all around you, the web collapsing, the darkness expanding. You were no longer just a weaver, you were a part of this unraveling. The threads you had disturbed had become your own undoing, and there was no escape. This is the cost, the voices whispered, their words like a chorus of the damned. The price of your interference. The price of your arrogance. And then, for the briefest moment, you saw it, the source of the darkness. It was not a thing, not a creature, but a presence, a concept. It was the void, the nothingness that lay between the threads, the endless space where fate had not yet been written. It was the force that held everything in place and the force that sought to destroy it all. It was the darkness that existed before the first thread had been spun, before the web had been woven. It was the emptiness that the web had sought to fill, the chaos that the threads had kept at bay. And now that darkness was pulling you in. You could feel the tug, a powerful, insistent force, drawing you toward the center of the void, toward the very heart of the unraveling. You could feel the weight of the abyss pulling at you, the overwhelming gravity of its pull. The shadows around you were growing darker still, their tendrils twisting and weaving into one another, merging with the darkness that had emerged from between the threads. The forest, the clearing, the web itself, all of it was being consumed, unraveling piece by piece, thread by thread. The world as you knew it was beginning to fall apart. But there was still a choice. You could feel the power within you, the power that had once allowed you to weave the threads, to shape the web. The darkness was closing in, but there was still something within you, a spark, a flicker of defiance, a lingering thread of will. You could fight back. You didn't know how, but you knew that you had to. You had to stop the darkness before it consumed everything. You had to find a way to reweave the web, to restore the balance that had been lost. The forces that you had awakened, the guardians, the darkness, they were not the end. They were just part of the cycle, part of the grand design. But the choice was yours. Would you let the darkness consume you and the web with it? Or would you rise against it and attempt to restore the fragile balance of fate that had been so carefully woven? The threads were still yours to command, but they were unraveling faster than you could keep up. Would you fight or would you surrender? The darkness waits and the web trembles. The decision is yours. The pull of the abyss was unlike anything you had ever felt before. It was an overwhelming force, a gravity so intense that it felt as though the very fabric of your being was being torn apart at the seams. The darkness swirled around you, tendrils of shadow reaching out like hands, cold and unforgiving, dragging you toward the heart of the void. The web, the intricate tapestry you had once sought to manipulate, was now coming undone at an alarming rate. The threads you had touched, pulled, and altered were slipping away from your grasp, unraveling as if the very universe itself were rejecting you. Every moment felt like an eternity, and with every passing second, the web, the world, was slipping further and further out of your control. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer just voices. They were feelings, sensations coursing through your mind like a flood. The sensations were cold, suffocating, as though something was gnawing at your thoughts, devouring your consciousness. You felt a gnawing emptiness at the core of your being, a hunger that threatened to consume everything you were. The whispers weren't just from the figure in the shadows, they were coming from everywhere. From the very fabric of the web itself. From the guardians. From the forces that had been waiting in the cracks between the threads. You have disturbed the balance. The words echoed like thunder in your mind, a constant refrain. The abyss, the darkness between the threads, it was all your fault. You had pulled the first thread, set the cycle in motion, and now there was no turning back. The consequences of your actions were unfolding before you, and the weight of them was crushing. The shadowed figure, whatever it was, loomed closer, its tendrils winding through the air like serpents, the very essence of the darkness that had always existed between the threads. You could feel its presence pressing in on you, suffocating you. The shadows were growing darker, the very air around you thickening with an unnatural weight. There was no escape, no place to hide. The forest around you was a distant memory, fading as the abyss closed in. The clearing, the campfire, the very ground beneath your feet, they were all being consumed, swallowed by the void. The very essence of reality, of existence, was being unmade. And yet you could feel something else, something deeper. The spark of defiance that had lingered within you, buried deep beneath the crushing weight of the darkness, began to flicker. It was faint, a mere ember in the face of the overwhelming abyss, but it was there. It was your will, your ability to choose. In that moment, you realized something profound. The web, as vast and powerful as it was, could not exist without you. It was not some distant force outside of you, but something deeply interconnected with your own essence. You were not just manipulating the threads, you were the threads. You were the weaver, and the web was both your creation and your destruction. And this was your moment. The moment where the choice whether to fight or surrender would decide everything. The darkness, this ancient, insidious force, was not simply destroying the web. It was trying to take you with it. You had been caught in the web cycle, yes, but you had also become something more. The web was alive, and so were you. And now, standing on the precipice of complete destruction, you could feel the power that remained within you. The power to shape, to create, to weave once more. The very fabric of fate was within your reach, still alive, still pulsing with possibility. The shadows pressed in closer, the figure's tendrils wrapping around your mind, your soul, seeking to pull you into the void. It was ancient, and it fed on the unraveling of the threads, on chaos, on the destruction of order. But it was not the only force in this web. You were more than just a weaver, you were the source of creation. The darkness had always existed, yes, but so had the light. So had the balance. You could still fight. The tendrils of darkness reached out to claim you, but now you felt the threads respond to your touch. The web, your web, was not simply a passive thing. It listened. The threads that had slipped from your grasp were still connected to you. The very web that had begun to unravel was still yours to command. You felt the pulse of the web, the hum of its ancient power, calling to you. The darkness was strong, but it could not survive without the balance. And you could restore that balance. You could reweave the fabric of fate. In that moment, you made your choice. You would not surrender. You would fight. Your hands reached out, trembling but resolute. You could feel the power surging through you, the threads of the web coming back into focus, the weight of their complexity both overwhelming and intoxicating. With each thread, each tiny movement, you felt the fabric of reality come alive in your grasp. The web itself seemed to respond to you as if it recognized your will, recognized you as the weaver. You could feel the threads knitting together again, slow at first, but with increasing speed as your confidence grew. The darkness that had been closing in around you recoiled, its tendrils shriveling as you pulled the threads back into place. But it was not enough. The darkness was relentless, and though the web began to repair itself, the abyss continued to fight, pushing against the very fabric of reality. You could feel the tendrils wrapping around you once more, like chains, pulling you toward the heart of the void. The whispers grew louder again, more desperate. They filled your ears, your mind, as though trying to drown out your thoughts. They wanted you to succumb. They wanted you to break. "You cannot defeat us," the voices hissed. "The darkness is eternal. The web will crumble. You will fall." But your resolve was stronger now. The threads were yours, and they were not going to be torn apart so easily. You could feel the ancient power of the web surging through your veins, strengthening with each passing moment. The web was not just a collection of threads. It was you. It was life. It was the very structure of existence itself. And now, you were not simply fighting against the darkness. You were weaving a new path, a new fate. The force of the web surged within you, each thread a pulse of creation, of power. You could feel the light within you growing, pushing back the darkness, unraveling its hold. The abyss shuddered, its tendrils recoiling as though in pain. The whispers, once overwhelming, now seemed to fade, their power weakening. The force of your will, of your determination, was too strong. The clearing began to change. The forest, once dark and twisted by the weight of the web's unraveling, was slowly being restored. The trees, once bending under the weight of the shadows, straightened as the light pushed through the dark. The air, once suffocating, now felt clearer, fresher, as if a great weight had been lifted from the world. The very fabric of reality, the web that had been torn asunder, was being woven back together, thread by thread. And as the last tendrils of darkness faded into the ether, as the web mended itself and the forest returned to its natural state, you realized something. This was not just a victory. It was a reminder. The web was always in flux, always shifting, and you were part of that. You were a weaver, but you were also a creator. Every thread you touched, every choice you made, had ripples across the entire fabric of existence. And the darkness had shown you one undeniable truth. The balance of the web was never guaranteed. It would always be threatened, always pushed to the edge, and it would always be up to the weaver to decide what path to follow. You had chosen to fight, and in doing so you had restored the balance. But you also knew that the web was never truly finished. There would always be forces at play, both light and dark, that would seek to change the flow of fate. The guardians would watch, the darkness would wait, but the web itself would continue to shift. And you, the weaver, would always be part of it. For the web was not just threads. It was life. It was fate. And it was yours to weave. The world around you had begun to settle, the tumultuous energy that once gripped the clearing now dissipating like smoke into the wind. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on you, like an ancient, suffocating fog, had lifted, leaving behind a clarity you had not felt in what seemed like a lifetime. The forest, which had once seemed so dark and alien, was now alive with the soft rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of birds, and the rhythmic drip of rainwater from the branches above. The balance had been restored, but something inside you had changed. The quiet was not peaceful, but heavy. The echoes of the abyss, the forces you had faced, still lingered in your mind like a distant thunderstorm waiting to break. You took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh, cool air. The crispness of the forest seemed to hum with new energy, an energy that was both familiar and strange. The world had been altered by your actions, but you knew that it wasn't the world that had changed. It was you. The forest had always been a place of power, of life and death, of the ever-turning cycle of the web. But now you stood at the center of it, more attuned to its rhythm than ever before. As you moved through the clearing, you felt a subtle shift in the way the air moved around you. The wind, once harsh and cutting, was now gentler, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. The shadows, which had once seemed to stretch out with malevolent intent, now seemed to retreat as though they no longer had power over you. The threads of fate you had once feared seemed to pulse with life, their tension no longer suffocating but part of the natural flow of the world. The web, once a tangled mess of possibilities, now felt more like a living entity, an intricate dance of light and shadow, fate and free will. You understood now that the web was not just a structure to be manipulated. It was a balance, a delicate harmony between opposing forces. Darkness and light, chaos and order, creation and destruction. They were all part of the same cycle. To weave was to understand that everything was connected, that every choice, every thread, no matter how small, reverberated throughout the vast expanse of the web. And now you were no longer just an observer or a weaver. You were a guardian in your own right. The forces you had awakened, both dark and light, were part of you now. You could feel their presence in the back of your mind, their pull still subtle but ever present. The Watcher's warning echoed in your mind once more. The darkness never truly leaves. It waits in the cracks, in the spaces between the threads. It is a part of the web just as much as the light. But now you understood the web's nature in a way you never had before. You were not at its mercy. You were its keeper. And as you moved through the forest, something caught your eye, a flicker of light in the distance, faint but distinct. It wasn't the fire you had left behind. This light seemed to pulse, to flicker with energy as if it were part of the web itself. Curiosity tugged at you, a gentle pull that was almost impossible to resist. You had faced the darkness, yes, but there was always more to discover. The web was vast, and no matter how much you had learned, there was always another layer, another path to follow. You followed the light, stepping deeper into the forest, the rain now a gentle mist that seemed to wrap around you like a cool embrace. The trees parted ahead, revealing a small clearing where the light had come from. At its center stood a single ancient tree, its bark twisted and gnarled, its roots stretching deep into the earth as if reaching for something buried below. The tree was unlike any you had ever seen before. Its leaves shimmered with an ethereal glow, not of firelight, but something more otherworldly, something that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the web itself. As you approached the tree, the light seemed to respond to your presence, intensifying for a moment before settling into a soft, steady glow. You could feel the energy of the tree, deep and ancient, vibrating through the air. There was something familiar about it, something that resonated deep within you. The threads you had woven, the choices you had made, had led you to this moment. You could feel it now, the pull of the tree, the connection to something far older than anything you had known. You reached out, your fingers brushing the bark of the tree. The moment your skin touched its surface, a jolt of energy shot through you, not painful, but electric, alive. The threads you had pulled, the power you had tapped into, all of it seemed to converge here at the heart of the forest. The tree seemed to recognize you, to acknowledge your presence in a way that made the very air feel alive with potential. And then the whisper came, not from the shadows but from the tree itself. It was faint at first, just a murmur in the back of your mind, but it grew louder, clearer, until you could hear it with perfect clarity. It was not a voice, but a feeling, a pulse of understanding. "You have done well, Weaver," the tree said, its voice like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. "But the web is vast, and your journey is far from over." The words seemed to echo in the clearing, vibrating with an energy that was both comforting and overwhelming. The tree was not just a part of the forest, it was a part of the web itself. And it was offering you something, knowledge, power, a path forward. It had watched you, observed your journey, and now it was reaching out to you, offering you its guidance. The whispers, the darkness, the forces you had fought, they were all part of the same intricate web. But the tree was different. It was a source of life, of light, and it had a power that was ancient, beyond even the shadows. "You have reweaved the web," the tree continued, "but the threads are never fully mended. There is always more to be done. You are not just a weaver, you are a guardian, a keeper of the balance. The web will shift again. The darkness will rise again. And when it does, you must be ready." The weight of the tree's words sank into your bones. You had restored the balance, yes, but you had also unlocked something else, a deeper understanding of your role within the web. You were no longer just a passive force in the cycle of fate. You were an active participant, a force that could shape the web, hold it together, or tear it apart. The question now was not whether you could control the web, but how you would choose to wield that power. The balance was fragile, and while the darkness had receded, you knew that it would always wait for an opportunity to strike again. The threads of fate were always in motion, always shifting, and it would be up to you to guide them. The tree's light pulsed once more, and you could feel the energy of the web resonate deep within you. It was both humbling and exhilarating, the realization that you were part of something far larger than yourself. The web stretched across everything, through every moment of time and space, and you, as its keeper, had the power to influence its course. But that power came with great responsibility. You had seen the consequences of disturbing the threads, of weaving without understanding. The web was not just a tool, it was a living, breathing entity, one that could not be manipulated without cost. The choice is yours, the tree said, its voice soft but filled with an ancient wisdom. You can choose to leave, to walk away from the web, to let it unravel and return to chaos. Or you can stay, continue to weave, continue to guard the balance. The path ahead is uncertain, and the web will always challenge you. But know this, the web is not a prison. It is a gift. You stood there, in the heart of the forest, the weight of the decision pressing down on you. The darkness, the void, the web, all of it had shown you one undeniable truth. The world was not as simple as it had once seemed. There were no easy answers, no clear paths. There was only the web and the choices you made within it. The forest had shown you its power, its ancient rhythms, and now it was offering you a place within it. The web was not something you controlled, it was something you were a part of. And as long as you remained a part of it, the balance would always be in your hands. What would you choose? Would you step into the role of guardian, protector of the web, and continue to weave, knowing that darkness would always threaten the balance? Or would you walk away, leaving the threads to unravel on their own, accepting the inevitable chaos that would follow? The decision was yours. The air around you seemed to stand still, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for your decision. The weight of the tree's words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. You could feel the pulse of the web, the subtle hum that resonated through your every fiber, every thought. The web, this intricate ancient system of threats, of fate, was more than just a structure. It was a living, breathing entity, and you were a part of it. The threads, the forces that had once felt beyond your control, now seemed more familiar, more intimate, as if they were extensions of your own will, your own choices. The clearing had grown eerily quiet, save for the soft rustle of the leaves in the wind, the distant drip of rainwater sliding down the trunks of trees. Even the shadows, once so full of mystery and malice, seemed to recede, pulling away from the light that now radiated from the ancient tree before you. The very air seemed to shimmer with the energy of creation, as if the universe itself had paused to watch the outcome of your choice. In that moment, you realized that this was not just a choice between good and evil, light and dark. It was a choice of purpose. To continue weaving, to become the guardian of the web, meant embracing an eternal role, one of responsibility, of vigilance. It meant standing at the very crossroads of fate itself, forever intertwined with the ebb and flow of time, of life, of death. The darkness would rise again, the threads would fray, and the forces of chaos would never rest. You would always be at the heart of it, balancing the forces, choosing which threads to strengthen and which to sever. And yet, as you stood there, gazing at the ancient tree, you understood that the web was not a prison. It was freedom. It was the endless possibility that came with the power to shape fate, the ability to weave your own path, to forge your own destiny. But it came at a cost. The darkness would always be lurking in the corners of the web, always seeking to unravel the threads, to return the world to chaos. The balance you sought to maintain was a delicate one, and even the slightest misstep could send the web spiraling into disarray. But walking away, that was a choice too. To step away from the web, to release yourself from the role of guardian, would mean letting fate unfold on its own. The forces of darkness would rise without your interference, and the web would unravel, but perhaps that was how it was meant to be. Perhaps chaos and order were two sides of the same coin, and to abandon the web would allow the threads to return to their natural state, free from the constraints of your choices. It was a choice between control and release. The wind picked up again, swirling around you, carrying the scent of earth and rain. The ancient tree seemed to hum with energy, its light flickering softly in the darkened clearing. The whispers in the back of your mind, once overwhelming, had quieted, replaced by a calm sense of clarity. You could feel the weight of the decision resting on your shoulders, but it no longer felt like a burden. Felt right. You understood now that the web was not something that could be fully understood, not something that could be perfectly controlled. It was ever-changing, shifting with the ebb and flow of time and choice. You were a part of it, but you were not its master. The web had always been in motion, and it would continue to be. You were not just the weaver, you were a part of the grand design, a thread woven into the infinite tapestry of existence. Your role, whatever it was not a solitary one. You were connected to everything, every living being, every event, every choice, and you could feel that connection now more clearly than ever before. The choices you made, the paths you followed, rippled through the web, sending waves of change across the threads, shifting the very course of fate. You were not alone in this journey. The Watcher, the forces of the web, the Guardians, the darkness, these were all parts of the same intricate system. You had seen the pull of the shadows, the hunger that came with chaos, but you had also felt the light, the energy of creation, the pulse of life. You were the balance between these forces, and you had the power to tip the scales, to weave or unravel, to create or destroy. The ancient tree seemed to sense your inner turmoil, and it responded, its light flickering brighter. The whispers became a soft hum, a gentle murmur in the back of your mind. It was not a command, not a directive, but an invitation. The choice is yours, Weaver, the tree said once more, its voice like the rustling of leaves. But know this, every path you take will leave its mark. Every thread you weave will create ripples across the web, and every choice you make will have consequences. The web is not just a thing to be manipulated. It is a living, breathing entity, and you are a part of it. You cannot control it, but you can guide it. You cannot escape it, but you can embrace it. The words resonated deeply within you, stirring something in your chest. You had always thought of the web as something to be controlled, something to be shaped and twisted to fit your will. But now you saw it differently. The web was not just a tool, it was life itself. It was the essence of existence, the interwoven fabric of every living thing, every moment in time, every choice made. You were not the master of the web, you were its steward. The ancient tree's light grew brighter still, its energy filling the clearing, pulsing with the rhythm of the universe itself. You could feel the threads of fate shifting around you, responding to your thoughts, your emotions. The power was overwhelming, intoxicating, but it was also humbling. The threads were not just yours to control, they were part of something far larger than you. The web was not a prison, it was freedom. Freedom to weave, to create, to shape the course of existence. But with that freedom came responsibility. You could feel the pull of the darkness again, just beyond the edges of the light, waiting for its moment to strike. But you also felt the pull of the light, the pulse of life, the energy of creation. You had seen the dangers of meddling with the web, but you had also witnessed its power. The web was a delicate balance, and you were its keeper. With a deep breath, you made your choice. You would not walk away. You would not abandon the web. Instead, you would embrace your role as its guardian. You would continue to weave, to guide, to shape the threads, but you would do so with an understanding that the web was more than just a tool. It was life. It was the pulse of the universe itself, and you were connected to it, as much a part of it as any other thread. The ancient tree seemed to pulse with approval, its light shimmering brighter, as if acknowledging your decision. The clearing, once quiet and still, was now alive with the energy of creation. The trees swayed in the wind, the leaves rustling like 1,000 whispers, all converging into a single, harmonious hum. You could feel the web shifting around you, responding to your choice, to your will. The threads you had once feared were now yours to weave. The darkness, the chaos, the forces that sought to unravel everything, they were still there waiting, but they would not control you. You were the keeper of the balance now, the steward of the web, and you would guide its course. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. You were no longer just a part of the web. You were its guardian. And the journey was just beginning. The winds had settled, the storm long passed, and yet the forest still hummed with a subtle energy, an undercurrent of something ancient, something powerful that coursed through the very earth itself. The clearing, once again bathed in a gentle light, felt both vast and intimate, as though the entire forest had been held in a single breath, and now that breath had been released, flowing out in a steady rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the world. You stood at the center of this vast, living web, a quiet presence within the tumultuous forces that surrounded you. The tree, glowing with an ethereal light, its ancient bark shimmering in the fading sunlight, had not faded or lost its vibrancy. It stood as a beacon, a symbol of the delicate balance you had chosen to protect. You were no longer just a visitor to the web, nor merely a weaver of its threads. You had become a keeper, its steward, its protector, its guide. The decision you had made lingered in the air around you, a pulse that matched the rhythm of your own heart. The weight of it was not oppressive, not as it had once felt when you were merely a pawn within the web's vast, unknowable network. Now, it was something different, a responsibility, yes, but also a gift, a bond. The threads, though invisible to the eye, were no longer distant and foreign to you. They were part of you and you part of them. You were the weaver, yes, but you were also the thread. And now, the world itself awaited the next step in its endless, shifting dance. The whispers in your mind were no longer fearful, no longer a cacophony of chaos and destruction. They had calmed, softened. There were no longer voices screaming for release, demanding your attention. Now, the whispers were a gentle hum, a reminder of the interconnectedness of all things. The threads of the web still called to you, still vibrated with the pulse of the universe, but you no longer felt alone in your journey. The balance you had restored had made its mark, not just on the world around you, but on yourself as well. The ancient tree's light flickered, and a soft rustling echoed through the branches. The wind, now lighter and warmer, whispered through the leaves. A single leaf, glowing faintly with a soft, silver light, fluttered from the tree's branches, falling slowly toward you. It hovered for a moment before gently landing in the palm of your outstretched hand. You held the leaf for a long moment, examining its delicate veins, the intricate pattern woven into its surface. The leaf, like the threads of the web, seemed to shimmer with a faint glow, pulsing with life, with possibility. It was not just a leaf. It was a piece of the web, a symbol of the balance you had restored and now held in your hands. "You are ready," the voice of the tree murmured softly, its words echoing through your mind. "You have embraced your role as keeper of the balance. The web is vast, and the threads you weave will always change, always shift. But now you are no longer alone in your journey. The guardians, the watchers, the forces that watch over the web, they are with you." The words filled you with a strange sense of peace, as though a weight had been lifted from your shoulders. The fear that had once clung to you, the uncertainty that had gnawed at your spirit, was gone. You had made your choice, and in doing so you had found your purpose. The web would always challenge you. The forces of darkness would rise again. But now you were no longer at their mercy. You were a part of something greater, a force that existed to protect the threads, to maintain the delicate balance of the universe. The leaf in your hand began to pulse with an increasing intensity, its glow growing brighter, stronger, until it seemed to light up the entire clearing. You could feel the threads of fate stretching out before you, their paths shifting and intertwining in a dance as old as time itself. The web was alive, and now you were part of it, part of the endless flow of creation and destruction, of light and dark. "The web is not only the threads you can see," the tree whispered, its voice calm and steady. "It is everything. It is the wind that carries the seeds, the rain that nourishes the earth, the fire that burns and renews. The web is alive, and it is constantly shifting, constantly changing. You are the keeper of that change, the protector of the flow." The glow from the leaf intensified, and the threads of fate seemed to bend toward you, responding to your presence. They twisted, turned, and then wove themselves into a new pattern, an intricate, ever-changing dance that reflected the vastness of the universe, the infinite possibilities that lay before you. You could feel the threads pulsing with life, with intent. Each movement, each choice you made would create ripples that resonated through the entire web. You were no longer just a weaver, you were now a creator. The leaf in your hand shimmered, its glow becoming blinding, and for a brief moment, the world around you seemed to blur, as though the very fabric of reality was stretching and distorting. You felt a tug, a pull deep within you, a sensation that seemed to echo from the very core of the web itself. It was as though the threads of fate were calling to you, urging you to move forward, to continue weaving. "There is more to the web than what you see," the tree said, its voice filled with ancient wisdom. "The web is not just the threads of fate. It is the space between the threads, the silence between the choices. The web is the unseen, the forces that guide, that influence, that shape the course of existence. The light, the dark, the balance between them all. You are now its guardian, and you will walk the path between them. You will shape the web, and it will shape you." With those final words, the tree's light dimmed, and the clearing fell into a deep, profound silence. The wind had died, the rain had stopped, and all that remained was the gentle hum of the web itself, reverberating through the very fabric of existence. You stood alone in the clearing, the leaf still glowing in your hand, a symbol of your new purpose, your new role. But now the world stretched out before you. The web was vast, and the threads of fate were endless. You were no longer just a part of the web, you were its keeper, its protector, its guide. The forces of darkness would rise again, of that you were certain. But you had learned something vital on this journey. The darkness was not something to be feared or destroyed. It was part of the web, as much a part of life as the light. The key to balance was not in the eradication of one force or the other. It was in the understanding of both, in the careful weaving of the threads, in the knowledge that both light and dark were necessary to the existence of the whole. The leaf in your hand began to fade, its light dimming as it became a part of you, a reminder of your journey, of your choice. You could feel the threads of fate continue to pulse around you, their paths weaving and shifting, always in motion. You were no longer a passive observer. You were an active participant, a force in the eternal dance of creation and destruction. The forest was still, but the web was alive, and your journey was just beginning. The forest had quieted, but the stillness was deceptive. Beneath the surface, the world pulsed with the steady, rhythmic hum of the web. The web, once something distant and abstract, now felt as real and immediate as the air you breathed. The threads stretched out before you, their intricate patterns swirling in the depths of your perception, but the more you tried to see them, the more they eluded you, shifting in ways you couldn't comprehend. There were no boundaries, no clear lines to follow. The threads tangled and unwound, then rewove themselves in infinite loops, ever changing, ever evolving. Each thread, each movement represented a choice, an action, an intention that rippled across the expanse of the web and altered the course of fate. You had stepped into a new role, one that was far more than just that of a weaver. You were now a keeper, a steward of the balance that governed the web's intricate dance. The choice you had made, to embrace your position, was not one that would be easily forgotten. The forest around you had witnessed your decision, the trees and the earth itself had felt the shift in the air. The ancient tree, now fading into the distance, had imparted its final gift, its final lesson. The web is both a prison and a freedom, and in between, you are its guide. The burden was not a heavy one, but it was constant. Every breath you took, every movement you made, the web felt it. The forces of darkness, the forces of light, both pushed and pulled at the fabric of reality, each vying for dominance, each seeking to tip the scales. The web was not something to be conquered, nor something that could be easily understood. It was something to be lived, something to be experienced. Every moment you spent weaving, every decision you made, was an action that reverberated throughout the entire web, sending ripples of change across the infinite tapestry of existence. But the more you observed, the more you understood, the web was not just about fate. It was not only about light and dark, creation and destruction. It was about connection. Every thread was a life, a story, a moment that was connected to another. Each decision, each shift, no matter how small, had an impact that could be felt by every other thread. The actions of one would lead to the actions of another, and together they formed the endless, winding loop of fate. The web was alive because it was interconnected. It was in constant motion, never static, never still. It moved with the breath of the universe, with the pulse of time itself. And you, as its keeper, had the power to influence that pulse. But with that power came choices. Choices that could either strengthen the web or tear it apart. Every time you reached out to touch the threads, to weave them into new patterns, you were altering the very fabric of reality. The balance was delicate, fragile. The darkness you had faced, the chaos that had threatened to consume everything, it was never truly gone. It waited, always in the shadows, always seeking a way to unravel the web, to return everything to nothingness. And now, it was your responsibility to ensure that the darkness did not consume the light, that the web did not break. You closed your eyes for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the web wash over you, feel it pulse in the very core of your being. The path ahead was uncertain, but that was the nature of the web. It was a living thing, constantly changing, constantly evolving. And with every step you took, the path you chose would shape the course of everything that came after. But the web was not just about doing. It was also about being. You were not just a force shaping the threads. You were part of the web itself. Your choices, your existence, were as much a part of the fabric of the universe as the forces of light and darkness, creation and destruction. You were both weaver and thread, creator and creation. With this understanding, you realized that your journey was not one of isolation. The web was vast, but it was also filled with others. The guardians, the watchers, the forces that moved within the web, they were not just distant observers. They were active participants just as you were. They too had their roles to play in the infinite dance of fate. You could feel their presence now, deep within the forest, hidden in the very air itself. They were not tangible, not in the way that you were, but they were there, just beyond the veil, watching, waiting. Some were ancient, older than even the web itself, their threads woven into the very fabric of existence from the very beginning of time. Others were newer, created by the web itself in response to the ever-shifting flow of creation and destruction. The web was not just a thing of time, it was a thing of purpose. The threads that made it up were not random, not chaotic. They were part of a greater design, one that had always existed and always would. The web was the structure that held everything together, and it was through this structure that all things moved. It was the pattern behind the chaos, the design behind the disorder. And now you were part of that pattern. The decision you had made to embrace your role as keeper was not an easy one, but it was the right one. The web needed a guide, a protector. It needed someone to ensure that the balance was maintained, that the threads were not torn asunder. And you were the one chosen to carry that responsibility. The air around you began to shift again. The light, soft and ethereal, seemed to pulse with a new intensity. The trees whispered, the wind stirred, and you felt the presence of something, or someone, approaching. It was then that you saw it, a figure, faint and shrouded in mist, standing at the edge of the clearing. The figure seemed to shimmer, as if it were part of the very fabric of the air itself, its form not fully formed, but defined by the faintest outline of light and shadow. The figure did not speak, but you could feel its presence deep within you, as though it was somehow connected to the very essence of the web, to the energy that flowed through everything. It was ancient like the tree, like the web itself, but it was also something more. It was a watcher, a force that observed and guided the flow of the threads. The watcher's eyes glowed faintly, like two distant stars. And then, in a voice that echoed in your mind, it spoke. "The web is in motion," it said, its voice neither malevolent nor kind, but filled with an ageless wisdom. "The balance you have restored is fragile, and the threads you have touched are not the only ones that exist. There are other paths, other choices, other lives. And with each choice, the web shifts just as you have shifted it. The darkness you have fought will return as it always does, but so will the light. The balance is a constant ebb and flow, and it is up to you to keep it steady." You nodded, feeling the weight of the watcher's words settle within you. You were not alone in this task. The guardians, the watchers, these forces existed to guide the web, to protect it. They were as much a part of the flow as you were, and they would always be there, watching, waiting, helping when the time came. The watcher's form began to dissolve into the mist, its presence fading into the air, leaving behind only the faintest ripple of its passing. You were once again alone in the clearing, but you could feel the watcher's words resonate deep within you, as if they had been etched into the very core of your being. The web was vast. The web was endless, and you were a part of it. But now you knew that the journey ahead would be neither easy nor clear. The threads you had touched had set in motion a series of events that would ripple across the web, affecting everything in its path. The darkness would always rise, but so too would the light. And it was up to you to guide the balance, to ensure that the web did not unravel. The leaf in your hand had long since faded, but its memory lingered, a reminder of your purpose. The threads of fate were all around you, shifting, pulsing, waiting. And as the wind picked up again, you took your first step forward. The path ahead was unknown, but you knew now without a doubt that the web would guide you. The clearing before you shimmered with the fading light, the mist curling and swaying like a living thing. The forest itself, the trees, the wind, the whispers, they were all part of it now. Every leaf, every rustling sound, every breath you took, it was all woven into the vast expanse of the web, and you were no longer a mere observer of that great dance. You were a participant, a thread among countless others, with the ability to shape and guide the path the web would take. The watcher had left, but its presence lingered in the air, in your very being. The connection between you and the web, between you and the forces of darkness and light, was stronger now, clearer. You could feel it pulse beneath your skin, a constant hum like the beat of a heart. You were no longer separate from the web, you were part of it. Every decision you made would reverberate through the threads, every action a ripple that could change the very course of the world. But as you stood there, alone in the clearing, the weight of your new role pressed down on you. The responsibility was immense, and you knew deep in your soul that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, with choices that would test you in ways you could not yet comprehend. The web was vast and ever-changing, a labyrinth of interwoven fates and forces, and it was yours to guard. To protect it, you would need to understand it on a level far deeper than you ever had before. The trees swayed in the breeze, their branches stretching toward the sky as if they too felt the pull of the web, the pull of the force that bound all things together. The air around you was thick with energy, an energy that was not just of the forest, but of the very fabric of existence itself. The web was a living, breathing entity, constantly shifting and evolving, never static, never still. And you were at the center of it, a keeper of its balance, a guide through the storm of life and death. You closed your eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the pulse of the web to wash over you, to fill you with its energy. In that moment, it was as if you could feel the very essence of the universe, the heartbeat of time itself. Every moment, every choice, every action, every ripple, it all had a place in the grand design. The web was not just a structure of fate. It was the foundation of everything. The balance of light and darkness, creation and destruction, was not merely something that existed within the web. It was the web. The tension between these forces, the push and pull, the ebb and flow, this was what made the web alive. And this was what you had chosen to protect. Your fingers brushed against the bark of the ancient tree, and for a moment, you could feel the pulse of the web resonating through it. It was not just a tree. It was a living conduit of the web, its roots stretching deep into the earth, its branches reaching toward the stars. It was as much a part of the web as any other thread, and you could feel the power it held within its core. The tree had been the first to offer you its wisdom, and now, it stood as a reminder of the delicate balance that you had agreed to guard. The web was not an abstract concept. It was rooted in everything, in every tree, in every leaf, in every heartbeat. The wind began to pick up again, the leaves rustling as if speaking in a language you could almost understand. The air grew colder and the mist thickened around you, swirling like a veil. You could feel the presence of the web more strongly now, the threads weaving themselves into intricate patterns, shifting and changing with every breath you took. It was alive. It was alive, and you were its keeper. You knew that the darkness, the chaos that had once threatened to tear everything apart, was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. The web was fragile, and though you had restored balance for now, the forces of darkness were always watching, always waiting. They would rise again. It was not a matter of if, but when. The balance you had worked so hard to restore could easily tip into chaos once more. But you were no longer afraid. You understood now that the web was not just something to be protected. It was something to be respected. Your role was not to eliminate the darkness. That was impossible. The darkness was as much a part of the web as the light, a necessary force in the great cycle of existence. Without it, there could be no light. Without death, there could be no life. The web was a balance, and that balance required both forces to exist in harmony. The darkness, like the light, had its place. It was only when one force grew too strong, when the threads became too tangled or frayed, that the web began to unravel. And that was where you came in. The wind began to howl, and the mist thickened around you, swirling with a strange energy. The clearing seemed to grow darker, the trees looming like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky. The air was electric, crackling with the energy of the web. It was as if the very forest itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the web's pulse. The threads that made up the world were close now, so close you could almost see them, almost feel them. In the distance, a flash of light caught your eye, and you turned, your heart racing. There, in the darkness, a shape moved, a shadow within a shadow. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but you knew deep in your bones that it was not just the wind or the mist. It was something else. Something else was watching. You felt the presence of the web shift again, its energy intensifying, as if it were responding to the figure. You took a step forward, your senses on alert. The threads of fate pulsed around you, their patterns twisting and turning as the figure approached. The air was thick with anticipation, and the wind picked up once more, whipping through the trees with increasing intensity. The figure came closer, its shape becoming clearer. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood. It moved with a fluid grace, like a shadow slipping through the cracks of the world. It was not of the forest, not of the web. It was something else. Something ancient. Something that had once been part of the web but had slipped through the cracks, lost in the shadows, forgotten. The figure stopped at the edge of the clearing, its eyes glowing faintly beneath the hood, like two pale embers burning in the darkness. You could feel its presence in your chest, the pull of its energy, the weight of its intentions. It was no mere traveler. It was an entity, something that existed outside the threads, something that defied the balance of the web. And yet it was here. It had found its way back. You think you can control the web, the figure spoke, its voice low and echoing in the vastness of the clearing. You think you can weave fate and bind it to your will. But you are not the first. There have been others. And they too thought they could hold the threads. They thought they could walk the line between darkness and light, between creation and destruction. But they, like all who came before you, will fall. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and charged with a force you could almost taste. Your heart pounded in your chest, but you stood tall, feeling the web pulse around you, the threads shifting and responding to the energy of the figure before you. The web is not something you control, the figure continued, stepping closer. It is something that controls you. And when the time comes, when the balance tips, when the darkness breaks free once again, you will be powerless to stop it. The web will unravel and the threads will snap. And all that you have worked for will fall to dust. You stood silent, but within you the threads of the web responded, weaving themselves into a new pattern, forming a barrier, a shield. You were not alone in this. The web, the forces that you had learned to weave and guard, were with you. The balance would not be lost. The figure raised a hand as if to strike, but the threads pulsed once more, a wave of energy crashing through the clearing, sending the figure stumbling back. The force was not one of destruction, but of protection, a reminder that the web, no matter how dark the forces that sought to undo it, would always find a way to heal itself. The figure stepped back into the shadows, its form dissolving like smoke in the air. The mist receded, the wind calmed, and the clearing once again became still. But the threat remained, lingering in the distance, waiting for its moment. And you knew, deep within your bones, that the battle for the web was far from over. The web would always be in motion. The darkness would rise again. But you were ready. The threads would not break. You would not allow it. The balance was yours to guard. And the journey, your journey, was far from complete.